The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, Natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home? A temple to the new India or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Portland, Oregon. And hope you had a wonderful Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever your holiday may be. I hope it was a fine time. We had a wonderful time. 19 family members over on Christmas. It's just amazing. Anyhow, today I want to, or at least in the starting point here, I want to get into some of the issues that we understand and misunderstand about taxes, money, wealth, and how the very, very morbidly rich in the United States have seized not only virtually complete economic power in this country, but also virtually complete economic power. They're damn close. And they're doing absolutely everything they can to nail it down so that they never lose it. And all over the country, you've got, individual Democrats running for office to pry those nailed down boards back up. But anyhow, some concepts. The first is a concept of money. And this is actually a brilliant piece. Conrad Shaw, he's a writer, an actor, filmmaker, lapsed engineer is how he describes himself. Wrote this piece for Medium.com titled Money Isn't Money. And he makes 2 important points that I just want to stick in your head here. The first is, he says, if you give a starving man $5, you've given him his next meal, right? He can buy a sandwich. But if you give a wealthy man $5, you haven't given him a sandwich. He doesn't need a sandwich. What you've given him is $5. So sometimes money actually represents, our core needs, and sometimes money represents money. It's just money. It's just a medium of exchange. And then then building on that, he takes the example of Mark and Mary. Mark and Mary live in the same neighborhood in the same town, so all the economic and socioeconomic and whatnot factors are the cost of living and everything. It's all the same. And Mark makes $40,000 a year. Mary makes $20,000 a year. And in this particular neighborhood, when you add up the cost of rent and food and transportation and basic stuff, electricity, septic, water, all the just the basic stuff that you have to live, it costs $19,000 a year to live in this neighborhood. Mary's making $20,000. So Mary has $1,000 in disposable income at the end of the year or throughout the year. Mark, on the other hand, who's making $40,000, Mary's making $20,000. Now, most people would say Mark makes twice as much as Mary, right? Because he makes $40,000, she makes $20,000. He's actually making 21 times as much as Mary, because both of them have to spend $19,000 to live in the neighborhood. After that money is spent, and that's not really money, that is cost of living, right? After the basic core costs are covered, Mary has $1,000 left over. Mark has $21,000 left over. So there's a huge difference between the two. And as Conrad Shaw writes, this is why increasing wealth and income inequality are so insidious, and it's why the wealthy should pay a larger share of taxes. So you got that. Put that in your head. Secondly, Eve Smith wrote a brilliant piece over the last week over at nakedcapitalism.com. And it starts out by recapping the current most widely held theory that keeps constantly being regurgitated on the pages of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times and you know, talking to financial advisors or friends or whatever, that why is it since 1980 the economy has just been kind of Why is it that wages never recovered after the Reagan presidency? Why is it that are working people's wages? Why is it that the rich, the top 1/10 of 1% or 1/100th of 1%, have seen their income go up over 600 times, 600%? But the average working person has actually seen their wages go down since the Reagan presidency. Why is that? The main theory that's put forward right now is that we stimulate the economy, that the economy is soft because of lack of cash. Whether it's lack of available credit or whether it's lack of money for investment. It's a theory that's devoted to the top end of the economic pyramid, right? That there's and the story goes something like this. Because, and in fact, actually, I can quote from Eve Smith here. The secular stagnation is caused by a heavy overdose of savings, right? People are saving their money relative to investment, which is caused by higher retirement savings due to a declining population growth and an aging labor force, and an inflow of precautionary Asian savings. In other words, the theory that everybody's operating under is that billions and billions of dollars of money are coming from China, and you know they're buying up real estate, driving up housing prices, but they're not helping anybody's wages. That baby boomers are aging out, and they're just saving their money. That wealthy people are saving their money, and all those savings are slowing down the economy. And the Fed needs to speed it up by making interest rates even lower. Well, we know that that's not true because the Fed reduced interest rates to zero, functionally. Some countries, in Switzerland, they actually made them negative. You actually had to pay banks to take your money. And they would loan you money for free, functionally. Didn't make any difference. And as Eve Smith points out in his piece over at Naked Capitalism titled Debunking Mainstream Economists on Secular Stagnation and the Loanable Funds Fallacy, Eve Smith points out that what really drives economies, and we've known this since Adam Smith, but somehow we've forgotten this since Reagan, since we got indoctrinated with this mindless, trickle-down theory. But what drives economies is something called aggregate demand, which is wages in people's pockets. In the pockets of people, remember my Mark and Mary example? In the wages in the pockets of people who spend virtually all their money. So if we really want to stimulate the economy, what we need to do is do the things that cause wages to go up, which means empower unions. Well, what's Donald Trump done? One of the first things Donald Trump done is take a meat axe to unions. This from Dave Jamieson in the Huffington Post. In less than a year, Trump has stripped back workers' ability to unionize. His revamped labor board issued a slew of new policies at the end of 2017 that will make collective bargaining harder. So Trump is doing the things that, and the Republicans are doing the things that will suppress wages, which isn't going to help the economy. At the same time that they're telling us that, you know, this was the Jobs Act, right? The tax cut was actually the Jobs Act. At the same time, they're telling us that by giving rich people more money, well, by giving all of us more money, they're saying that it's going to, you know, wonderfully stimulate the economy. Well, some money will be going, you know, some of these tax cuts, many of these tax cuts will be going to people in the middle, but they're not going to be very large and probably won't have that much impact on the economy, and they're not permanent. They're only there for a few years, and then they go away. The tax cuts for rich people are permanent. The tax cuts for corporations are permanent. The tax cuts for banksters are permanent, but the tax cuts for average working people, no. They go away after just a few years. So what the Trumpistas are doing is the exact opposite of what should be done. The next thing I want to share with you after this break that's coming up, and then you know, we'll pick up your phone calls. How's the year been for you? It is you know, it's December 27th here. It's we're coming up on the end of the year. And what are your thoughts about the next year? I'll share some of mine as we go along. But then I want to get into a discussion of why it is that, and there's an actual reason for this. And it's been a while since I've done this rant. So those of you who have heard, you know, have been listening to the program for years and years, you'll recognize it. Those of you who haven't, it will be new. Why is it that when Reagan cut taxes, wages went down?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Why is it that when George Bush cut taxes, wages went down? Why is it that when Clinton raised taxes, wages went up? I'll explain all that in just a second. And welcome back. Dion in Round Lake, Illinois. Hey, Dion, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how was your Christmas with your family and your dog?
It was nice. It was really nice. So
yeah,
I hope yours was too, Dion.
Former Congressman Ron Paul said that President Trump is in a bit of illusion and that the debt, inflation, and inequality could cause turmoil that benefits a hardcore nucleus of libertarians. How do you think the GOP tax plan is going to affect the disconnected Trump supporters that voted for Trump, like the people in West Virginia?
Well, if you define that hardcore nucleus of libertarians as rich people, then, yeah, Trump's policies are going to help them, already are, dramatically, tremendously. What am I missing in your question, Dion?
Well, it seems like we're going to collapse like the Soviet Union, like in 1989. And
no, we're not. This country is not collapsing. This country is changing. The Soviet Union actually ceased to exist as a nation, and big chunks of it went away, and what was left was just Russia. And you know, for the United States to do that, it would be the equivalent of you know, all the southern states actually seceding, and you know, the northern states or the blue states or whatever becoming, you know, a different country. That's not going to happen here. Instead, what's happening, Dion, is that we are slowly, and I say slowly advisedly, I mean, it's been happening throughout most of my lifetime, or at least half of my lifetime, since the election of Ronald Reagan, arguably since the election of Richard Nixon. We're slowly devolving into a kind of new world that Noam Chomsky describes. And in fact, I'm going to rant about that in the next hour. Noam Chomsky has a new book out about the 10 steps that it takes to destroy a democracy. And, you know, Trump is doing all of that stuff, and he's doing it with a great enthusiasm and great vigor, and with the full-throated support of, you know, of his billionaire buddies.
Yeah, the gas prices are going up, too, for his buddy and ExxonMobil. We're below zero here in Illinois, and almost most of the country, the gas prices are going to go higher.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, oil prices are going up. Commodity prices in general are starting to go up, and I think that that's simply because they're tracking the inflation rate, the interest rate. And the Fed has said, you know, they're going to raise interest rates 3 times next year. And if those interest rate raises are more than, you know, 100 basis points or so, if they're the typical, you know, quarter full point, 250 basis point rate increases, then, you know, they may be the thing that kind of rationalizes a crash. We'll see. We'll see. But the big thing, Dion, is that wages have not been going up, and Trump is doing all the things that a conservative Republican would do, that a billionaire would do, that a very wealthy person would do to keep wages from going up. And as long as wages don't go up, you're not going to see the economic expansion that Trump has promised everybody. What we're seeing right now is the logical extension of Obama's policies, in part, and Janet Yellen's work at the Fed. And there's an actual practical limit to that. In fact, they've already exceeded it, which is why the Fed is pulling back. So, Dion, thanks for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, I wanted to share with you the different ways that taxes impact rich people versus working people. I gave you that Mark and Mary example from who was it? To Conrad Shaw, you know, where Mark makes Mary makes $20,000, Mark makes $40,000, costs $19,000 to live in the community. Mary has $1,000 left over. Or disposable income throughout the year. Mark has $21,000 in disposable income throughout the year. So he doesn't actually make twice as much as Mary. He makes 21 times as much as Mary in terms of disposable income, which is what we need to think about. So with that in your head, let's now talk about taxes. If you were a billionaire and your tax rate was 40% and you make $1 million a year, let's say, just to use even numbers. You make $1 million a year, you pay a 40% tax rate, so your take-home pay is $600,000 a year. Odds are you're not living on that much. Maybe you do. I don't know. But, you know, 600 grand a year. So what happens if you get a tax cut? If you're that multimillionaire, that guy or woman who's making $1 million a year, what happens when you get a tax cut? What happens when the tax rate goes from 40% down to 20%? Your after-tax income, your before-tax income was $1 million. You took home $600,000 because you paid $400,000 in taxes. Now you're only paying $200,000 in taxes, so your after-tax income is $800,000. So you got a $200,000 a year raise. And like Mark, you know, you've got a lot more disposable income. But that's all. It doesn't affect your standard of living. It doesn't affect your quality of life. It doesn't affect pretty much anything, because it's just money. Now, to go back to Conrad's example of, you know, when money's not money, when money is survival. Let's say that you're that multimillionaire guy who owns the business, and I'm your employee. And you know, because I've told you, because you can look, because, you know, this is how it works, and you know that I'm willing to work for $50,000 a year, let's say, after taxes. That's what I need to live on. Let's say we live in a, you know, kind of an expensive, well, it's not even all that expensive. Let's say $50,000 a year, just to make it even. So actually that wouldn't be, let's say we've got that same 40% tax bracket. So let's say I need let's say I need $60,000 a year to live on. Okay, so so you're my employer. You're paying me $100,000 a year. I pay 40% in income taxes. I have $60,000 a year left over to live on. So what happens when my taxes go down? My $100,000 a year salary, which is $60,000 a year in take-home pay, if the tax went from 40% to 20%, now becomes $80,000 a year in take-home pay. Okay, so I'm making an extra $20,000 a year because I got a tax cut. But you're my boss. You're my employer. And you know that not only do I need $60,000 a year to live, you know, at whatever standard of living I've defined, or I've decided that I want to, you know, I need to live by $60,000 a year. But you also know that I don't need $80,000 a year. Right? I only need $60,000 a year to live. So as my employee, and you also know that anybody else who's willing to take my job, whatever it is I'm doing, in all probability, being from the same community and having the same skill set, are willing to do that job for $60,000 a year after taxes. So what do? You come to me and you say, you know, you're making $20,000 a year more now than you were last year because you got a tax cut, so I'm going to drop your wages by $20,000 a year. If you want to continue working for $80,000 a year, which nets out to $60,000 after taxes, that's great. Love to have you stay here. This is essentially what General Motors said to their employees, remember? If you don't want to stay here, I can easily hire somebody. You will tell me that you can easily hire somebody for $80,000 a year who will take home $60,000 and do the same job. Now, I would be crazy to say, no, I'm going to walk away from a job that now pays essentially, take-home pay is identical to what it was before. I'm still taking home $60,000 a year. Now, let's say the taxes go up. Let's play this thought experiment. We just played it, taxes going down, and what you can see is when taxes go down, rich people get richer, and working people get a pay cut. Following this? When Reagan cut taxes on working people, his tax cuts were right across the board. When Reagan cut taxes, wages went down, or they flattened, and they've continued to go down over time, you know, particularly when you consider inflation. But rich people got much richer. So what happens when taxes go up? Bill Clinton raised taxes about 3.5%, as I recall. Barack Obama raised taxes around 2%. What happened after those tax increases? Wages for working people went up. Now, why would that happen? Okay, back to your example. You're the rich guy employer, and you're making $1 million a year, and your tax just went from 40% to 50%. So instead of taking home $600,000 a year, you're only taking home $500,000 a year. But you're living on a couple $100,000 a year. All the rest of it's disposable income, or you stick it in your Swiss bank account. So it doesn't matter to you. It's just less in savings. Taxes go up on me, the working guy, and my $100,000 salary, which is $60,000 take home. Say the taxes went up 10%. Now I'm taking home $50,000 a year. Now, you as my employer know I can't live on $50,000 a year. I'm going to start looking for another job because I've got to have $60,000 take-home pay. So what do? You come to me and you say, you know, I'm going to give you a $10,000 raise. So that you're still making $60,000 a year after taxes. So for rich people, when taxes go up, they simply have less money. For working people, when taxes go up, wages go up. And history proves this. Look at the tax increases of the 19-teens for fighting World War I. We were at a 91% tax level in 1920 when Warren Harding came in on the campaign promise of dropping the top tax rate to 25%. He did so. What happened? Poverty actually increased among working people in the Roaring '20s. Wages went down. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So I hope I've laid this out in a way that makes sense. If you don't understand it or get it, give me a call. Let me know what you don't understand, and I'll go through it again. We'll be right back.
We're reading today in the Thom Hartmann University Book Club from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. This is chapter 3, page 53. It's titled Population. Sometime between mid-2007 and mid-2008, China exceeded the United States as the single largest emitter of carbon dioxide, dumping an estimated 7 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year in 2008, compared with the U.S. estimated 6.2 billion tons that year. But China is a vast and populous country. On a per-person basis, Americans are still the most profligate producers of carbon dioxide, with the average American in 2008 directly responsible for around 19.4 tons of greenhouse gas, not to mention the portion of China's emissions that went to make products shipped to and consumed by Americans. Russia, with its less than modern industrial infrastructure, comes in second at around 11.8 tons per person. It's a cold country, and few homes are truly winterized. Then the European Union at 8.6 tons per person, and China at 5.1 tons per person. India, which is rapidly industrializing, is still one of the most efficient per-person nations in the world at 1.8 tons of CO2 per person per year. Although that's because much of the country is so poor they don't have cars, the winters don't require much heat except in the extreme north, and the focus of India's industrialization has been digital rather than manufacturing. The largest driver of all these processes that are tearing our planet apart and putting all life at risk is the increase in human biomass. There are roughly 1 trillion pounds of human flesh on the planet right now, and assuming a worldwide average food consumption of around 3 pounds per person, in the U.S. it's almost 5 per day, we're consuming around 7 trillion pounds of food per year. One result of this is that over half of the entire net productive capacity of the planet, the entire planet's ability to produce edible products from photosynthesis, is now used up, displaced, or wiped out by humans, leaving every other life form on Earth to compete for the leftovers. Our population growth has not been particularly even. In the first 100,000 years of human history, we averaged around 20 to 50 million people total. 60,000 or so years ago, as we moved out of Africa and began to cover the world, we crept up to a few hundred million by the time of Christ, 2,000 years ago. Around the time of the Crusades, when the world was, by most definitions, pretty well populated, we were coming into conflict with each other all over the world. There were only 500 million of us on the entire planet. Not long after the American Revolution, we hit our first billion humans on planet Earth in 1800. The second billion didn't take 165,000 years. We doubled our population in just 130 years, hitting 2 billion in 1930, just as the United States was sliding into the Republican Great Depression. But that economic debacle didn't slow the growth of human numbers. By the year JFK was sworn in, just 30 years later, the planet had added another billion humans. The growth in population was driven largely by cheap, abundant oil and fertilizer and pesticides made from it, the farm and transportation equipment fueled by it, and the processing, packaging, and distribution system made possible by oil that lets a person in Iowa have a lunch of tilapia fish grown in ponds in China, lettuce and tomatoes grown in Mexico, wine imported from France, and a fruit cup of berries imported from Chile and strawberries from Nicaragua. In this environment of relatively abundant food, even in the third world, our fourth billion took us only 14 years to add, 1974. Our fifth billion only 13 years, 1987. And our sixth billion only 12 years, 1999. As oil became more expensive, raising the price of food indirectly, since most of us are actually eating oil, population growth first began to slow in the first decade of the 21st century. Part of this was attributable to birth rate declines in developed countries, part to an explosion in the death rates because of TB and AIDS in the third world, part to famine and associated diseases in sub-Saharan Africa as deserts moved south due to global warming. But while growth is slowing, we're still adding people at a rate many times faster than just 3 centuries ago. Topsoil all over the world is vanishing. Transportation is becoming exponentially more expensive. And as human population density increasingly resembles the inside of a petri dish, diseases ranging from TB, more than 1 billion people are infected, and more die from that than any other cause worldwide, to AIDS, to the constantly mutating common cold and related corona and flu viruses, remember SARS, represent a menace that is dramatically amplified by the 1 trillion pounds of human flesh such diseases inhabit. We are not the first culture to reach this threshold of population versus resources. As I discussed at length later in this book, the Maori of New Zealand, a group of Polynesian explorers, are a prime example of a culture that, like the Europeans who discovered America, thought they had found a land of unlimited wealth and food, but ultimately learned that there is a limit to growth, the biosphere, and that when you unthinkingly hit that limit, life can become hellish and democracy nearly impossible. But the concept of a limit to growth, or a finite world, was largely unknown to the classical economists on whose assumptions, formulas, and work our modern economy is organized. In fact, the classical and neoclassical economists, from Malthus to Jean-Baptiste Say to Marx to Friedman, would suggest that the Maori hit the limit not of their biosphere, the ability of the land of New Zealand to produce food, but of their technology. They would correctly point out that today New Zealand houses several million more people than it did when that island nation was entirely populated by Maori. And modern technology has ensured that not only is there enough food, but that surplus agricultural land has been turned to a growing of fuel and medicinal crops. The book is Threshold.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And John in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Hartman, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
I can hardly hear you. I'm sorry. It's very low the volume. Oh, I was listening to what you were talking about, Mary, and I forgot the man's name, and how she made $20,000 and he made $40,000. And it's funny. I had something like that happen with me, and Mary's got an issue where Mary's living in a neighborhood she just can't afford. Mary needs to find a neighborhood that she can afford, so Mary can have more disposable income. It's not the gentleman's fault that he makes $40,000 a year.
I'm not saying it is.
He's not.
What I'm saying is, John, you're completely missing it. You're thinking that I'm criticizing John for making 21 times more in disposable income than Mary. There's a lot of decisions both of them can make. My point was.
What I'm saying is, when my family came to this country, they didn't have any jobs. They lived in Manhattan on Mulberry Street. You know, that was kind of like what they call the Italian ghetto. And my family worked their way out of it by getting better jobs with a better education. Mary doesn't belong in the neighborhood she's living in if she can't afford to pay for it.
No, she can.
The problem with most people in this country is we give away so much. Mary doesn't have to go live in the neighborhood.
I don't believe this. John, you are completely missing my point. You are and talking over me. You're completely missing the point. And the point was that we need to change the way we understand money. Money is energy. Money isn't just like, something the Treasury makes. Every country, every civilization, every culture, since the advent of agriculture, and even many hunting-gathering societies, but not so much there. I mean, wampum typically was to tell stories and to record information more than for transactions. But ever since we started locking up food, which became the first form of money, money has represented life energy. Money represents literally the energy of our lives. And we need to think about it in that context. And Conrad Shaw's point was that whatever your cost of living is, and whether it exceeds your neighborhood or not, is irrelevant. Those are choices that you can make, where you want to live, what you want to do. And I get it that you think that our welfare programs are too generous. I respectfully say, screw you. Our welfare programs are nowhere near solid enough to catch people who are falling through the social safety net. And people are falling through literally every day. We just had here in the United States for 3 weeks the UN's expert, the special raconteur on poverty. And what he found was that in large chunks of the United States, severe poverty associated with poor health, toothlessness, hunger, literally malnutrition, is here in the United States, the richest country on earth. So my point was that we need to change how we think about money. That was just it. Jesse in Miami. Hey, Jesse, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Happy holidays.
Thanks. Happy New Year, Jesse. It's coming up anyway.
Yep. Hey, I hope it's a lot better than this past year. I think we could do it. You really key on talking about the way money is looked at and it need to be changed. The topic I want to talk to you about was you made the book The Crash of 16. Mm-hmm. I say you was right. I put it like this. Trump coup was to prevent the crash. So I'm trying to say that when you talk about tax, the system now is so desperate that the elites need to take direct control of the government so they could consume the taxes, because the private sector is bankrupt. It has no credibility. So when you say the taxes, money need to be looked at as different, I would put it this way. You can't separate politics and economics, because that's our problem. Doing that, they could get away with saying, well, you're free. Yeah. You could vote for whoever you want.
Well, in the extension,
but economically, that's different. It's like it's separated. If the government could earn its own money, it wouldn't have to tax.
Well, in theory, I mean, it would debase the currency if the government simply issued money and used that to pay for things.
No, they would be in the market like the private sector. But the private sector has been Jim Crowing it from day one. The government is only allowed tolls, fees, and taxes. It can't get out there and build a bridge for itself.
Well, it can. It's the itself is us. I mean, government is us. That's the thing that most conservatives miss, is the first three words of both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We the people. It's us. You know, we the people create governments, you know, among men and women.
We create wealth, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
We only allow the tax and you know, fees and tolls. That's it.
Yeah.
That's wrong.
Well, I don't think it's wrong. I think I think that there should be a separation between what is public space and what is private space. My concern, Jesse, is kind of the opposite. Is that we have privatized so much of government functions, including the military now, that there's you know, that rather than things being done on behalf of we the people, we have things being done on behalf of corporate profits. And and it's skewing how these corporations, these contractors behave, and you know, and what they're doing. So, you know, good point. We'll get into that a little later on the program. But Jesse, thank you. Alex in Utica, New York. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Hi.
Hey.
Hi. I thought that if you plant trees and nitrogen fixtures, fish ponds, and food forests that hold underground seas of water, and perennial vegetables, and wood chips would give them fertility, and wood chips prevent fires in California, it would be better for them.
So you're advocating permaculture, basically.
Yeah, but if you take your tax deduction, you could reinvest in the land that you own around you.
Right.
And
it is, you know, one of the more effective ways to sequester carbon is the way that nature has done it for 4 billion years on this planet, or arguably maybe 2 billion years on this planet. And that's through photosynthesis. It's through growing things. It's you know, it's sequestering it in the soil ultimately. And I don't disagree. I think it's a great point, Alex. Thank you for calling and making it. Tony in Tigard, Georgia. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
I was just checking your math out here on the $100,000. Gentleman making $100,000 and he gets a tax break.
Right.
So now he's making $80,000.
Well, take-home pay.
Yeah, take-home pay. Well, that's the government. That has nothing to do with the employer. The employer's still paying him the $100,000.
I know.
I mean, you know, now you're getting the government into everything, and you're absolutely right about we the people. And we the people have voted in a new president that wanted to give us a tax cut.
All right. And it's going to lead to a drop in wages.
You know, that was another thing you explained. That you see, I own a business, and that's why I picked up the phone to call you. Because what you're saying, you've obviously never owned a business, have you, Tom? Have you ever owned a business before, Tom?
Tony.
Do you own one now? If it is, it's probably failing.
Tony,
have you owned a business?
Yes, I have, and I do own a business right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I've owned, Tony, in my lifetime, I've owned 7 businesses that have generated over $250 million in revenue. I've had several hundred employees in the 40-plus years I've been in business. I understand business.
Was it with the government that you worked?
Tony, I never worked for a government.
Contracts with the government?
I never had yes, I did. I did.
That's what I thought.
I did 1 week. I did 1 week of work for the NSA, and I've done trainings for the CIA and for several branches of the military. But that, you know, none of that has anything to do with this, Tony. The point, and you know, I get your whole, you know, let's kill the messenger thing. You know, it's a great Fox News attempt. You learned well from right-wing radio, but you're full of BS. You're completely wrong. I do know what I'm talking about, first of all. And don't have to justify that to you or anybody else. But number one. But number two, you're missing my point. Taxes. We have to have taxes to fund our government. Do you disagree with that, Tony?
I do not disagree with that.
Okay, fine. So if we have to have taxes to fund our government,
taxes
have a secondary purpose as well, and that is to change behavior. There's a reason, for example, why we give people a tax deduction on mortgage interest, because we want them to buy houses rather than rent. We made the decision back in the 30s that it would be a good thing if people owned their homes, have equity in your life. That would be a good thing. So we changed our tax code to encourage that. We encourage business behavior with our tax code. And one of the ways that business behavior changes as a function of the tax code, is that as working people, as the employees of businesses see their taxes go down, their take-home pay goes up. And their employers,
I don't understand why you say that.
And their employers,
I really
I would submit, Tony, that that you're a fairly crummy. Well, no, now I'm doing the Fox News thing. I'm going to stop right there. As their employees' wages go up as a result of tax cuts, there is zero reason left for an employer to give people wage increases, pay raises in a labor market. The labor market is a function of what people are willing to work for. It's real simple. And what people are willing to work for is not before tax income. It's after tax income. That's the only thing that matters. It's just like my example with John and Mary. It's after the necessities are taken care of. What's left over is what matters. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's astonishing to me that people who listen to a lot of right-wing radio don't understand basic economics. You're listening to Rush Limbaugh, who's making $400 million a year. Welcome back. I should correct that. Limbaugh's last contract that I saw reported in the news was $400 million, but I think it was for a decade. So, $40 million a year. What can you say? Anyway, it's crazy. Kim in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Kim, what's on your mind? Thanks for listening to X-Ray FM.
Hi, Tom. Thanks. A year ago, I came on your program making an offer to teach my small business Gentle Disposition for free to groups that make a nonprofit. Gentle Disposition is a service for families who've lost a loved one and need help taking care of the things left behind by that loved one or clearing it in their home. I have not yet had any takers, and today is my father's birthday, and he did pass away 3 months ago, and out of that I was fortunate enough to receive some insurance. I am now offering $5,000 seed money to groups that will make a nonprofit. To a group, I should say. And I'm going to be awarding the money in the fall, but I'm going to have an opportunity for groups to submit, their argument for why they would be the best to build a worker-owned cooperative. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to come on and inform your listeners about that and also encourage them to spread word about this because I'm trying to help economic opportunity be more abundant in this nation, and especially with what's going on at our government level.
Sure. What's the website, Kim?
GentleDisposition.com.
GentleDisposition.com. There you go. Okay. I hope you get some positive feedback. Thanks a lot, Kim. Good luck. Chales in College Grove, Tennessee. Hey, Chales, what's up? Chales, watching Free Speech TV?
Yes, this is Fake Doctor.
You are on the air.
All righty. I just wanted to bring Corker and Alexander and Marshall Blackburn, and it's from the great state of Tennessee. She was for the opiate. She sponsored the bill, and I know everybody voted for it. And then Corker kicked that kid, and Alexander kicked that kid. And then when the union approached German Volkswagen, then both of them come back in the state and wanted didn't want the union so people could have a $2 or $3 more raise, but they give themselves the kickback, and all 13, 14 of them up there. Mm-hmm. And then I can't understand why something would be like it is today, that something couldn't be done to them people doing and giving their own selves or some kind of investigation. I know they investigate everything, but Hatch, I know Hatch is the one who sponsored it and everything, but it looks like to me there'd be something that people like me could do. And besides, I know everybody says, I'll pass it on, I'll do this, I'll do that. Every time I call Alexander and Jarrett and all them, I pass it on, I pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
And I vote too. And
What's your principal, Chales, what's the principal message that you pass along to Corker and Blackburn and, your elected representatives?
Just be honest with you, the damn crooks is what they are. I don't know no other way to put it, and I'm sorry.
There you go. Okay, Chales, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Very well said. We'll be back. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live post-Christmas, coming up on New Year's. It's that kind of in-between week, right? The last week of the year. And I think a good time to have some big-picture conversations, like how do economies work? How do taxes work? How does money work? What does it mean? Frank in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for your show. I very much enjoy it. Like you, I'm pretty concerned about income equality and the growing spread between the haves and the have-not. It seems to be increasing at an alarming rate. And I'm also pretty upset about the tax reform, as it's called, where 80% of the benefit will go to the top 4 or 5% of the people. I think some of the things that you mentioned with respect to tax policy and anti-union efforts of the administration, while they're important, they kind of miss really what's been happening in the economy. If you look at workers' incomes since the Reagan years and how they've flattened out, which is a great observation, one that Bernie on your show talked about pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. There is a real cause of that, and it isn't tax policy, and union weakness is just almost a symptom as opposed to the cause. If you look at the world and ask somebody what's happened to workers' salaries or incomes, and the truth is they've gone up.
Especially in China.
They've gone up in the United States of America.
Right, especially.
As production has become global, what's happened is the American worker is competing in a global marketplace. And the folks in India, the folks in Southeast Asia, the folks in China, I'm calling you from Tampa. A good friend of mine runs production of a very big manufacturing company, does products for companies like Apple. They do, and I asked him, I said, well, how much of this stuff is made in the United States? And he said, well, actually, I'm very embarrassed to say we have no actual production of products in the U.S. because if we bid out the projects for construction in the U.S., we would have no work because we couldn't compete with the other providers of technology products, right, like iPhones and laptops.
I'm familiar with the argument, Frank, and you're right. You're making a good case from the 20,000-foot view, right? There are large macroeconomic variables at work here, and they have to do with government tax policy, 100%. Only in this case, rather than taxing individuals, which is changes in the tax on working people versus rich people, do have an effect within an economy in terms of suppressing or encouraging the growth of wages for working people. But you're right, by changing our tax policy with regard to tariffs. When Reagan came into office, the average tariff on goods coming into the United States was around 20%. Historically, from the George Washington administration to the Reagan administration, the average was around 30%. It got up to 34% in the 1920s and 30s. And that encouraged domestic manufacture. This was something that Alexander Hamilton put into place in 1793 during the George Washington administration. It built the biggest industrial powerhouse in the history of the United States. When we fully embraced neoliberalism with the Reagan administration, and then when the Democratic Party embraced neoliberalism with the Clinton administration, we gave that all up. We said we are not going to be, quote, protecting our domestic manufacturers anymore. And we behaved as if the whole world was giving it up. Like it's just going to be, the whole world is going to become one giant factory floor. But the fact of the matter is that China is still protecting their domestic industries in a variety of ways. The most obvious are they have a VAT tax. They have domestic content requirements. They have domestic ownership requirements. We have none of those things, right? And it's not just China. Right. Taiwan does the exact same stuff. So does South Korea. So does Japan. So does every country in Western Europe. We have engaged in a suicidal trade policy, and it has devastated the American workforce. I absolutely agree with you, Frank. But I was talking tax policy, and this is, and tax policy exists as a small piece within that much larger piece of the greater economy, which is influenced by, in this case, tax policy. Only those taxes are called tariffs rather than income tax.
Well, we had a chance, though, with this tax reform on the corporate side to use, tax policy to incentivize U.S. production, give people a break to repatriate the billions of profits that Apple has offshore. If they would actually build something in the United States that would employ,
but they're not going to. They're going to distribute it as dividends.
Right, and it's
going
to go to the same 1% of the people.
Right.
It's all going to be concentrated on the same people. And
right, and the ironic thing, Frank, is Donald Trump campaigned on a platform of a 30% tariff. Remember that? I mean, this was from the Republican debates. 30% tariff on imported goods, right? We are going to bring manufacturing, and it would have done it. It would have brought manufacturing back to the United States. There would have been wild economic dislocations, particularly in Asia. But, after the dust settled, you would have America growing once again, as a manufacturing power. And in fact, Curtis Ellis, the guy who was the principal, one of the principal advocates for that, who used to fill in for me on this show back 15 years ago. Curtis and I go way back. Curtis is now working in we'll find out in a few minutes, in the Trump administration, pushing this trade policy, although he's become a complete Trumpista. But I mean, there was this rational position that Trump took on trade, but he's not following it as president. He only used it to get elected. It's like the American people understand this.
He used it to get elected, and then is kowtowing to the military-industrial complex and to the folks that you like to point to who control, most of the production and most of the wealth.
Right, the morbidly rich,
including his own real estate, brotherhood of tycoons who control every shopping mall and every building that you see that anyone works in these days.
Amen. Amen. Frank, well said.
It's all going there.
Frank, I got to run, but thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to WMNF in Tampa. We will be back coming up on the top of the hour here. Stick around. Curtis Ellis will be with us after the break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Crisis Without End. This is a collection of essays about nuclear power compiled by Helen Caldicott and edited by Helen Caldicott. I'm reading from the introduction, which she wrote. She is the world-famous Australian pediatrician, physician who has been speaking out about nuclear power and whatnot for years and years. On March 11, 2011, an earthquake measuring 9 on the Richter scale struck off the east coast of Japan. Within days, the ensuing tsunami had induced the meltdown of 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. During the earthquake, the external power supply was lost to the reactor complex. The pumps that circulate up to 1 million gallons of water per minute to cool each reactor core ceased to function. Emergency diesel generators situated below the plants kicked in, but these were soon swamped by the tsunami. Without cooling, the radioactive cores in units 1, 2, and 3 began to melt within hours. Over the next few days, all 3 cores, each weighing up to 100 tons, melted their way through 6 inches of steel at the bottom of their reactor vessels and oozed their way onto the concrete floor of the containment buildings, a fact that the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the power plant operator, continued to deny for months after the disaster. At the same time, the zirconium cladding covering thousands of uranium fuel rods reacted with water to create hydrogen, which initiated hydrogen explosions in units 1, 2, 3, and 4. Massive quantities of radiation escaped into the air and water, 3 times more noble gases, argon, xenon, and krypton, than at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in 1986, and huge amounts of other volatile and non-volatile radioactive elements, including cesium, tritium, iodine, strontium, silver, plutonium, americium, and rubidium. Fukushima is now described as the greatest industrial accident in history. The Japanese government considered plans to evacuate 35 million people from Tokyo as other reactors, including 4 at Fukushima Daini, several miles along the coast from Fukushima Daiichi, were also at risk. Meanwhile, thousands of people fled the area around the smoldering reactors, but they were not notified when the radioactive plumes were traveling, despite the fact that there was a system in place to track the plumes. As a result, people fled directly into regions with the highest radiation concentrations, where they were exposed to high levels of whole-body external gamma radiation, inhaling radioactive air, and swallowing radioactive elements. Administering inert potassium iodide to the exposed people would have blocked the uptake of radioactive iodine in the thyroid glands. Unfortunately, it was not supplied except in the town of Miharu, where there was a conscientious mayor. Prophylactic iodine was, however, distributed to the staff of Fukushima Medical University in the days following the accident, after extremely high levels of radioactive iodine, 1.9 million becquerels per kilogram, were discovered in leafy vegetables near the university. Iodine contamination was already widespread in leafy vegetables and milk, while other isotopic contamination from substances such as cesium was widespread in vegetables, fruit, meat, milk, rice, and tea in many areas of Japan. Fukushima disaster is not over and will not end for many millennia. The radioactive fallout, which has covered vast swaths of Japan, will remain toxic for hundreds of thousands of years. It cannot simply be cleaned up, and it will continue to contaminate food, humans, and animals. It is unlikely that the 3 Fukushima Daiichi reactors that experienced total meltdowns will ever be deassembled or decommissioned. TEPCO claims such a massive undertaking will take them at least 30 to 40 years. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, predicts that it will be more than 40 years before any progress can be made because of the dangerous levels of radioactivity at the damaged reactors. This accident is identical to the Chernobyl catastrophe in its medical implications. The Fukushima meltdowns will induce an epidemic of cancer as people ingest radioactive elements. The single meltdown and explosion at Chernobyl contaminated 40% of the European landmass. Already, according to a 2009 report published by the New York Academy of Sciences, over 1 million people have perished as a result directly of that catastrophe. Large parts of Europe will remain radioactive for hundreds of years, as will now be the case in Japan. In assessing the impact of the Fukushima disaster on Japan and on the planet, and in assessing the safety of nuclear power overall, it is imperative to understand and evaluate the biological and medical consequences of exposure to the kinds of radioactive elements that were released during an accident at a nuclear power plant. Fact 1, no dose of radiation is safe. Each dose received by the body is cumulative and adds to the risk of developing malignancy or genetic disease. Fact 2, children are 10 to 20 times more vulnerable to the carcinogenic effects of radiation than adults. Females tend to be more sensitive than males, while fetuses and immunocompromised patients are also extremely sensitive. Fact 3, high doses of radiation received from a nuclear meltdown or from weapons explosions can cause acute radiation sickness, including hair loss, severe nausea, diarrhea, and bleeding. Reports of these illnesses, particularly among children, appeared within the first few months after the Fukushima accident. And then it goes on, you know, the types of ionizing radiation. Crisis Without End by Helen Keller.
Book Kingdom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and on the line with us is Curtis Ellis. Curtis is a senior policy advisor with America First Policies, americafirstpolicies.org, F-I-R-S-T, and his Twitter handle is at Curtis Ellis, C-U-R-T-I-S-E-L-L-I-S, or at America First POL. Curtis, welcome back to the program.
It's nice to be with you again, Tom.
And I was just mentioning before the end of the last hour that back when I was on IE America Radio, you used to fill in for me on this show. And
that's right. You have a very good memory, Tom.
and that you were working in the Trump White House, and that we regularly had you on the program last year talking about trade policies. And I'm wondering, before we get to this super PAC that you're running and the ad that you guys ran, I'm wondering what happened to those, to Trump's promised 30% import tariff?
Well, what happened is he withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership as promised. He has begun renegotiating NAFTA as promised to get a better deal for America out of this tripartite trade arrangement. And the 30% import tariff, well, that's on the table. He's talking about cracking down on China, the national security strategy, which was released at the end of I believe it was last week, perhaps the week before. He talked about economic aggression of China and that we'll not stand for it anymore.
But talk is cheap.
Very, very consistently and strongly about tariffs. Government moves slowly, and then you have that thing called Congress. And there was a border adjustable tax being bandied about at one point on Capitol Hill, but under the constitutional system we have, it is the House that originates all tax and spend measures. And in their infinite wisdom, under the helm of Paul Ryan, they did not put in that border adjustable tax that was discussed.
Right, which would have been a sort of mini tariff, which is kind of tragic. So your PAC here, or a super PAC or whatever.
Well,
however
actually, the America First Policy is a C4 organization.
Okay, so you're a nonprofit, 501c4 that can do advocacy.
Right.
So
There is an affiliated PAC.
Right. So you're running an ad right now that, where a bunch of people are saying, thank you, President Trump, for this, that, and the other thing. And at the very end, this little girl says, thank you for letting us say Merry Christmas again. That really struck me as weird coming from somebody like you who actually has an understanding of how government works or should work. The president doesn't let or not let anybody say anything. And I'm sure you've seen the viral video that's floating all over the internet of President Obama saying Merry Christmas 17 times over the course of his last couple of years, I guess, in office. Nobody, and probably you saw the poll that the New York Times reported on a couple of days ago that only 3% of Democrats think that there's anything wrong with saying Happy Holidays, and it's some 12% of Republicans, and everybody thinks saying Merry Christmas is just fine. There was never a war on Christmas. It was something that Bill O'Reilly and Fox News invented, and something that completely lives inside the Fox News bubble. But the point that this little girl said, you let us say Merry Christmas again, doesn't that just absolutely and utterly destroy your credibility, or does that set us up for anticipating the day when Donald Trump decides that he's going to let us or not let us say certain things?
Well, that's very creative interpretation, Tom. I got to hand it to you. I like that. Look, anybody can say anything they want. They always could. Language, as you know, and words have a couple of layers of meaning. There's the literal meaning, and then there's a figurative and connotative meaning. And when they talk about the White House and the presidency being a bully pulpit, they don't mean that there's actually a pulpit in the White House and you've got somebody standing behind there with an English bulldog. So the president is setting a tone, and when he talks about Merry Christmas, you can't deny that there has been an increasing secularization of our society. And this idea of we're going to stretch everything so that everybody fits in it. And once you start accepting or believing in everything, you believe in nothing. And it's sort of draining the meaning out of this. Look, I'm Jewish. I don't celebrate Christmas. Never had a Christmas tree in my house when I was growing up. My father really was not a big fan of this time of year. He thought there was rank hypocrisy with people talking about peace on earth and goodwill to men. But I can't deny that, and as sort of as the Buddhists talk about empathetic joy being one of the first enlightenments, I have empathetic joy of people who celebrate Christmas. So I say Merry Christmas.
Yeah, so do I. That was my point. There never was any effort to not say Merry Christmas.
I disagree
and by the way,
with
the
you there.
commercialization of Christmas really began in the 1930s.
Secularization and draining. Let's just
but
Happy
Curtis,
Holidays.
this is a
We
nice
don't want to
dodge.
offend anybody.
It's a nice
we don't want to
dodge.
offend that
But
Jewish
my
person,
concern,
or we don't want to offend that.
You have
that,
not
that
answered my
Muslim
question.
Or that Hindu. And so, well, let's just say Happy Holidays. This
Curtis,
fear of offending
you are
people.
not answering my question.
Yes,
By
what is
having
your
this little
question,
girl
Tom?
say, thank you for letting us say Merry Christmas again, you are suggesting that when that black man was in the White House, he prevented us from saying Merry Christmas. Since the president can let us say it again, obviously the president could prevent us from saying it before. And that seems to me like an amazingly destructive meme for you to lay on the American people. First of all, it's a lie. And secondly, it suggests that the president is not a president, he's an emperor.
Oh, Tom, you're really getting worked up.
You're spending millions of dollars to put this meme in people's heads, Curtis. I don't understand why.
This meme.
Yes, this meme that the president lets us say Merry Christmas or prevents us from saying it.
Absurd extreme. As I said, he's using the bully pulpit to say, let's say Merry Christmas. Let's put some specificity.
No, I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about your ad. I mean, we could go through a long list. We could talk about how Trump has taken away the internet as we know it. Hey, thanks for that. Created a tax plan that will make the majority of Americans even more destitute. We're going to see wages for working people go down because of the tax cut. Taking away Americans' birthright to public lands, thanks Ryan Zinke and Trump. Taking away health care from 9 million children. They're planning on going after our Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell have both announced that. Trump is supportive of that, although when he campaigned, he said, I'm not going to touch any one of the three. Remember, he stood up on that platform with all those Republicans, and he said, I'm the only Republican on this platform who will tell you that I'm not going to touch your Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid. And now he's going after, he's already gone after Medicaid. And there'll be a 4% cut in Medicare this year automatically as a result of the tax bill. He's taken away protections from abuse by big banks and credit card companies, or he wants to. He wants to destroy Dodd-Frank. He's putting all kinds of corrupt judicial appointments. He's denying gun safety legislation to favor his big NRA donors. He's embracing white nationalists and Nazis. I get it why you might want to do a thank you ad for all those things, because they're all things that, this is the wish list.
You can go ahead and make one, but you better boil it down to 30 or 60 seconds. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
You want to get it on the air.
Good point, Curtis. Good point. Okay, we're running out of time here, but I still don't get why this little girl is saying, thank you for letting us say Merry Christmas.
You're taking these words literally, which is something the corporate media does all the time. And I know you're not corporate media, Tom.
Words have literal meaning,
We see
Curtis.
these commentators on CNN taking a very specific, literal interpretation of every word that's said, and then taking to the most absurd extreme to come to the most ridiculous conclusion that Trump is a dictator. Now, for example, we had Brian Stelter saying to one of the Trump people, when President Trump said about Khizr Khan, you have no right to say something that's dishonest. Brian Stelter on CNN says, what do you mean you have no right? The First Amendment gives you the right. If you look up the meaning of the phrase, no right to say, there is a meaning beyond the legal.
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that you were
letting us say Merry Christmas. There is a meaning behind the literal meaning, the legalistic meaning of giving us permission.
Okay. Nice filibuster job there, Curtis. Curtis Ellis. The website is americafirstpolicies.org. Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jennifer, listening on KBCS in Seattle. Hey, Jennifer, what's up?
Oh, hi. Hi there, Tom. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to get through, and I'm a longtime listener. I just wanted to bring up, when you were talking about tax and money policy, I thought it was interesting when you had Kate Raworth, the author, on last summer, and she, in her book, she mentions démarrage, which is kind of a wonky theory on money, but it's basically, it was tried in Austria during the interwar years, and it's basically putting a tax on currency so that it's spent, basically, so that it discourages hoarding.
Right.
And the idea is to make money like sort of like a newspaper or potatoes that kind of get old after a while, and you want to facilitate circulation rather than hoarding of it. And the idea is to make it less attractive as a commodity and more attractive as a medium of exchange. So I thought, well, in this current political environment, we may not get a lot of push for this démarrage, but I thought, gee, it's worth contemplating as an idea,
right,
if there was a way we could make it work. So I just wanted to mention that up on today's talk about money.
That's a great one, Jennifer. When I was reading Jefferson's letters back 20 years ago, and I came across a letter that he sent to one of his very close friends, and I think it might have been Benjamin Rush, but I'm not certain. I'd have to go back and find it. Where he it was the French Lafayette. It was to Lafayette, and the French military man, and he thanked Lafayette for sharing with him a book that was published in French by a French economist. And I'm sorry, it's been 2 decades since I read this. I can't remember the economist's name, but Jefferson was so blown away by this book that he translated it into English while he was president. This was 1803 or 1804. He was president of the United States, and he took a couple of weeks and translated this book from French into English and was sending it back to Lafayette. And his letter was asking Lafayette to be able to find a British or an English language publisher, but be sure that nobody knows that Jefferson translated it. And because he thought that there would be a firestorm, of people attacking him. And the principal suggestion of the book was to use something that had been around in Europe for a long, long time, which was a wealth tax. That everybody in Europe, or everybody in France was the suggestion here, who had wealth over a certain threshold, and I don't remember what the threshold was, but it was enough to very, very, very much live comfortably, that wealth would be taxed at 1 or 2% per year, every single year. So, which is the same thing you're talking about, Jennifer. Eventually, either use it or lose it. And, we're definitely not doing that here in the United States. Wealth is being accumulated at rates that are just mind-boggling. And the only time that we tax it is when it's passed along to undeserving heirs. And I say undeserving because they didn't work for it. Some sons and daughters work in the family company, and they take a draw paycheck, and they get a lot of their wealth that way. But others simply, sit around the pool waiting for the dividend check, and then when dad or mom dies, they get, a big pile of money. So. Anyway, you're welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for the call. It's an old idea, but it's a great one. I appreciate your call and your bringing it up, the discussion of it. So I've got to go back and find the Jefferson stuff and figure out what that book was, because I went out and I bought the book. I had to buy it on ABE Books. It's been out of print for like 100 years, and that was the essence of it, was a tax on wealth. Which Jefferson didn't want to be associated with, but he thought it was a great idea. We'll be back.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
With you. And Curtis and his little ad. You've probably seen the ad, thank you, President Trump. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is, I have a problem with this. Okay, there are a few other things in the news that I wanted to share with you. Some of the things that Trump is up to. There's an interesting piece Jordan Weissman wrote over at Slate magazine, where he says, remember R is greater than G? R followed by the little greater than symbol, the kind of sideways V, G. This was something that Thomas Piketty made famous, or Piketty, the French economist. He wrote a book called Capital in the 21st Century. And he said that when the rate of actual economic growth, which is G, is exceeded by the what he refers to as the rate of return, R, which would be the money paid for stocks, bonds, real estate, things like that, then inequality happens. So, in other words, when the price of real estate is going up faster than wages, or faster than productivity, and typically wages are tied to productivity. There's been somewhat of a disconnect since Reagan, but still, for the purposes of this discussion, let's tie them together somewhat. As long as real estate is going up faster than wages or productivity, as long as the stock market is going up faster than wages or productivity, as long as bond returns and yields are higher than the rate of productivity or wages, then what you will see is an increase in inequality. In other words, the rich will get richer, and the working people and the poor people will get poorer. It's a very, very, very simple formula. As Jordan Weissman writes for Slate, growing inequality paves the way for moneyed interests to exert ever more control over politics and the economy, leading to the kind of world dominated by capital and inherited wealth that Piketty warned us about, rather explicitly warned us about. And here we are. We've got a billionaire who inherited his money and lost it went bankrupt 5 times. We've got a billionaire running our country with a bunch of billionaires in his cabinet, all of which leads us with the overriding question, writes Jordan Weissman, why? Why would Republicans pass a tax bill so wretchedly unpopular? It has like 20% popularity. Why would they pass this bill so unpopular to benefit such a small slice of Americans, the very wealthy? But Lindsey Graham and Chris Collins have come right out and said that their donors demand it. And by the way, if you look at, what money is being given to whom, how, Louise found this amazing story over the weekend. I wish I had it printed out in front of me. Should have grabbed it. There was, I believe it was the Doug Jones-Roy Moore race, but it might have been another, it might have been one of the Virginia, it might have been the Virginia race. But in any case, what was being laid out was that the Democrat got tens of thousands of less than $100 donations, and the Republican got a few hundred or maybe 1,000. And so, the bottom line is, and you easily, intuition tells you this, is that the Republican Party is largely supported by a small number of large dollar donors, and the Democratic Party is largely supported by a large number of small dollar donors, which should tell you something about A, who those parties represent, and B, what their priorities are. Andres Miguel Rondon, if I'm saying that right, it's been a long time since I took Spanish in elementary school, is an economist who was born in Venezuela. He's a Venezuelan citizen. He lives in Madrid in Spain. And he wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post titled, "Scandals Will Never Defeat a Populist." Actually, the title is, "To Beat President Trump, You Have to Learn to Think More Like His Supporters." The subtitle is, "Scandals Will Never Defeat a Populist." And he makes a fascinating point. He says that basically, and he says this based on what he observed watching Hugo Chavez. Hugo Chavez was a left-wing populist, not in the Bernie Sanders tradition, but in the Donald Trump tradition. In other words, he was an authoritarian, an autocrat, and a populist. And so he's looking at Chavez, and he says, every time Chavez had a scandal, every time people attacked him for something that he stupidly did or seemed stupid, his strength grew. Because the people believed that Chavez was fighting for them. And so whenever he got attacked, and in fact, in some ways, Chavez was fighting for the people, in quotes. He radically increased taxes on rich people and used state money, principally from Pemex, from the state oil company. I think it's Pemex. Maybe that's the Mexican one. Whatever the state oil company is in Venezuela. Used money from that to pay for housing and food and all kinds of things for the very poor people of Venezuela. So people loved him when he got attacked. And what Rondon is suggesting is that whenever Trump gets attacked, his base actually strengthens. It actually builds for him. Which leaves us the question, how do you deal with Trump? We'll talk about that right after the break, and then we'll pick up your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And he makes a pretty strong case, by the way, that every time Trump was attacked, particularly during the primaries, his popularity actually grew.
Our Thom Hartmann University book review of the day is Richard Belzer's new book, Corporate Conspiracies, How Wall Street Took Over Washington. This is from the introduction. Of all the books we researched for this work, the title we loved the most was this one, Regime Change Begins at Home, Freeing America from Corporate Rule. We loved it because it presents as a hard fact something that very few people completely understand. And then he quotes from that book. Since 1980, America has been run by a corporate regime that has co-opted both political parties and shifted sovereignty from we the people to transnational corporations. End of quote. Since this book covers some corporate conspiracies, we will no doubt take a lot of heat for that and be deridingly referred to as conspiracy theorists. So we would just like to remind people that the phrase conspiracy theorist was actually invented by the Central Intelligence Agency, to be used as a weaponized term with which to discourage people from seeking the truth. We kid you not. CIA document 1035-960, dated April 1, 1967, regarding the agency's concern about the reputation of the American government, in quotes. That document also suggested various tactics for countering, quote, conspiratorial arguments, which confronted the gaping holes critics observed in the findings of the Warren Commission, which investigated, in quotes, they really did no such thing in reality, the assassination of President Kennedy. Quote, the agency also directed its members to employ propaganda assets to negate and refute the attacks of the critics, end quote. So as you can see, and as the Freedom of Information Act release of that CIA document clearly reveals, the use of the term conspiracy theorist is actually a conspiracy itself. But if you believe rightly that Julius Caesar and hundreds of other leaders were the victims of conspirators, as they were, then you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right? Well, if anybody actually believes that, then you'd better read up on your history, boys and girls, because conspiracies are an ongoing and very common occurrence in human conduct. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Are you aware that many friends of Robin Williams believe that his suicide was the direct result of the prescription drugs he was taking, and that over 23,000 suicides are attributed to psychiatric drugs each year in the United States? Did you know that turning prisons into a big business has resulted in the United States having the highest incarceration rate in the history of the world, and that most are just drug crimes? Are you aware that the historic event of the toppling of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Iraq was actually a U.S. military PSYOPs, psychological operations warfare, program, a completely orchestrated event with the knowledge and assistance of U.S. media, and not a spontaneous event as it was portrayed by our media? Did you know that the Pentagon is sending $1.5 trillion of our tax dollars to their corporate buddies for a new fighter jet that's already superfluous? Are you aware that continuing to rely on oil instead of investing in low-carbon energy solutions will cost us $44 trillion due to climate change? Did you know that companies like General Motors at times know that their products will kill people, but they do nothing because it's actually cheaper to compensate the victims than it is to correct the problem? Then read and learn on, friends. American corporations have been getting away with murder, literally, for many, many years. Just take a good look at their history. The above example of GM is a proven point. Corporate consumer advocate Clarence Ditlow, executive director of the nonprofit Center for Automotive Safety, bitterly criticized the settlement. Quote, GM killed over 100 people by knowingly putting a defective ignition switch into over 1 million vehicles, Ditlow said. Today, thanks to its lobbyists, GM officials walk off scot-free while its customers are 6 feet under. Tobacco companies knowingly lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes for decades, even though there was plenty of known medical proof of their damage. They even knowingly hid that information from the public. Oil, gas, and chemical companies have been knowingly polluting our planet with cancer-causing chemicals and products also for decades, and they know that they're doing it. Pharmaceutical companies have lied and attempted to minimize news coverage regarding the deaths that they know the drugs will cause. That's murder, plain and simple. Maybe you can paint a public relations damage control over that landscape if you happen to have all their tons of money and paid political influence, but it's still murder. Look at the parents of one of their victims straight in the eye and try and tell them it's not murder. Do you honestly think they'll listen to you? This book is an effort to reveal the insanity of corporate greed once and for all. At this point, most people probably care more about their local football team than they do about the workings of our democratic republic. And while we understand their frustration and their reasons, that's not good enough, folks. We have to all get involved to stop these bastards from getting away with what they've been getting away with for far too long. They're robbing us blind, poisoning our planet, hijacking our democracy, and ruining the futures of our children and grandchildren. They must be stopped. As an agent of the U.S. government employed to implement policies to benefit U.S. corporations, John Perkins noted in his classic work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that corporate America has extended its rule beyond our borders. Quoting from Perkins, what we had previously considered U.S. corporations were now truly international, even from a legal standpoint. Many of them were incorporated in a multitude of countries. They could pick and choose from an assortment of rules and regulations under which to conduct their activities, and the multitude of globalizing trade agreements and organizations made this even easier. Corporatocracy had become a fact, and it increasingly exerted itself as the single major influence on world economics and politics. Sad to make this observation, but we have become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, Donald Trump just another singular achievement. He is the first president in the history of the Gallup poll not to be credited in his first year in office as the most admired man in America or in the world. He was beaten by Barack Obama this year. Anyhow, I was talking about scandal and how for somebody like Trump or Chavez, that particular type of populist, and I would probably toss Mussolini and Franco into that mix and a few others. Scandal actually works for them. Scandal actually can help them. And this fascinating piece in the Washington Post by Andres Miguel Rendon, an economist living in Madrid, a Venezuelan citizen. He grew up, watching Hugo Chavez. He said, sheer outrage at the president's scandals is pointless. Now just get this for a second. He says, when directed at Trump, your anger gives him rhetorical ammunition to point at you, his besiegers. Trump, for example, said, we should have a contest as to which of the networks, plus CNN, not including Fox, is the most dishonest, corrupt, or distorted in the political coverage of your favorite president, me. Right? In other words, the press points out that he has lied about something or that there's a scandal involving him. And what does he do? He attacks the press. Or to bolster his claim for fighting his base, fighting on behalf of his base. Another Trump quote, drain the swamp should be changed to drain the sewer. It's actually much worse than anyone thought. It begins with a fake news. End of quote from Donald Trump. So when you attack him, you are giving him weapons to use against you. And Rendon says, worse still is directing your anger at his supporters, that you're doing the same thing Trump is, believing your side is all right and the opposite side is all wrong. Rejecting your common humanity and sense of country, you're playing into the polarization game instead of defeating it. So if dwelling on scandal is counterproductive, if pointing out scandal is counterproductive, how do you deal with a scandalous administration? Well, Rendon says what you do is you talk about actual issues with those very grievances that got Trump elected. Trump was, well, first of all, he lost by 3 million votes. But with that caveat, Trump became president promising to increase tariffs on foreign manufactured goods and thus bring manufacturing back to the United States. He has not done that. He has not even taken serious steps in the direction of doing that. The Republican Party never would have let him do it anyway. He had promised an increase in wages. Instead, he just passed a giant tax cut that's going to lower wages for working people over the next decade or over the next 4 or 5 years. Now, when the tax cut goes away on working people, arguably wages will go back up, but you'll have a different president then. We could be talking about cultural isolation, says Rendon. We could be talking about the depleted countryside. How our just our whole country, the opioid crisis. I mean, there's a lot of things where Democrats and Republicans both have a concern. The lack of civic engagement, people not showing up to vote, people not registering to vote. Well, now we've got an entire Republican Party committed to making it harder for people to vote. But just what he's saying is populism is, there's a quote from the article, he says, the problems are very real indeed. Populism is and always has been the daughter of political despair. So instead of attacking the populist, what you do is bring up the issues that are producing the despair. Meanwhile, the Republicans are working as hard as they can to make that despair worse. And in the next hour, I'm going to get to some of the ideas that Mike Pence, when he was the deputy director of the Republican Study Committee, the House Republican Study Committee, during Hurricane Katrina, September 13, 2005, his list of suggestions of how we should use disasters to advance Republican policies. We'll talk about that at the top of the next hour. Anita in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Anita, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How are you?
Good. What's up?
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you, too.
Now, right?
I think although it's Happy New Year's, this is the next holiday.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Well, I had to get a Merry Christmas in there now that it's legal.
Okay.
But,
yes.
Oh,
Thank you, President Trump.
We should not get angry about that. He is just trolling us. That is just a signal to his base that, this is part of the culture wars thing. So,
but here's the dangerous thing.
It's laugh.
It's a signal that endorses, I was going to say oligarchy. It is a signal that endorses some form of power being held in the office of the presidency that is not envisioned in the Constitution.
But it's so ridiculous, and I think people see him as a ridiculous, and that's why I don't agree with that Rendon guy, because Donald Trump is not a populist. He is not doing anything for those people. They voted for him, and they continue to support him because of this resentment and this victimhood they feel.
No, that's the essence of Rendon's entire argument, is that
he's not a populist. He's not throwing them anything. He's not giving them anything.
Well, we have to define populism then, Anita, because what he's saying, what Rendon is saying, is that Hugo Chavez was actually a populist because he actually was moving money from the wealthy to the people, to the popula.
Donald Trump's not doing that.
But Trump's doing the opposite. He's moving money from working people to the very top. But he's claiming to be a populist, and he's using the rhetoric of populists, and the majority of the Republican base believes he's actually a populist, and he's giving them things.
Well, yes, but he has like 32% that are probably never going to, they're going to continue to support him no matter what. And he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know anything about policy. So what does he do? He does whatever the Republican Party tells him. So he's going to support their stupid health care, reform. And he's going to support their tax scam.
Right.
Because he doesn't know any better. And eventually, I think they're going, I think at least some of the Republican base is going to catch on to that.
Well, I think what is happening is that very slowly it's dawning on the Republican base that Trump is a phony populist. That all those things he said to get elected were just things he said to get elected.
And real quick about the China thing that America First guy was talking about.
Right.
Yeah, Donald Trump talks really big and bad about China unless he's in China.
Right.
And then he tells them that, he understands or, that they take advantage of us, and that's okay.
Right. Or if
they'll laugh.
Right. Or if his which member of the Kushner family was it? I guess Jared's sister was over in China pitching, if you buy $100,000 worth of property, one of our condos, you qualify for a green card in the United States. It's like, really?
Exactly.
I mean,
and a lot of his stuff is made there, and his daughter's stuff is made there.
All of it.
So he's just full of it. He's not tough on China. He's not tough on anybody. Donald Trump is afraid of any kind of confrontation. Like Rex Tillerson said he wouldn't quit unless Donald Trump fired him face-to-face.
Right.
Well, he will never fire Rex Tillerson face-to-face, and Rex Tillerson knows that.
Right, yeah.
He's just a phony.
I think you're absolutely right, Anita. I think you're absolutely right. Anita, thank you for the call. It's nice to hear from you. And Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind?
Hey, Professor, happy holidays. Hey, I was listening to your boy,
that was Bing Crosby.
Curtis, and he was...
That was Bing Crosby. That was before Fox News.
Yeah, well, he was right about one thing. I got to give him props now. He said that the president, Mr. Trump, was setting the tone, and he's right. And that tone that he's setting has nothing to do with St. Matthew's chapter 25, verses 35 through 40 of the book that I read. But anyway, I wanted to ask you a question. What do you call a person that operates with sinister impunity and never goes to jail?
I don't know.
A corporation.
Oh.
Hey, listen, there's a book called Democracy in Chains. Read page 220 and 221. It's written by Nancy McLean. It's called Democracy in Chains.
It's a brilliant book.
The deep history of the radical right's stealth plan for America. Y'all got to check it out.
Yeah, I've read the book, Morris. And in fact, we've had her on the program as a guest. It's a great book.
She's top notch, man.
Nancy McLean is brilliant.
Scary. And also, folks need to understand that when you're talking about the rich paying taxes here in this country, you're talking about investing in this country, you see. When you read page 220 and 221, that'll let you know what their plan is. And good luck with you, Professor.
Well, you want, Morris, we have about 50 seconds here before we hit a break. You want to summarize that for us? I read the book, but it's been, what, 6-8 months ago, and I don't remember what's on which page. What was the point she was making?
Okay, on page, let me get my glasses out. That'll take me 2 seconds. I got that, and I have the book right here in front of me because that's how I roll. Let me see, page 220, 222. Yeah, what basically what they're talking about is, you remember your boy Scott Walker, the new anti-union rules unfurled by by Scott Walker in Wisconsin?
Right.
Okay, that's one of their plans. Okay, this comes from, and the second thing for African Americans, how do we get to the middle class? Through government jobs, because in the government you could discriminate against us. But by doing everything the libertarian way and privatizing everything, you can discriminate against us. And that's, your boy, he's not in here, but what's that guy name that, Morris, how come you can't think of him now? Lee Atwater. He said this. He said, look here, this plan, it's going to hurt white people.
Right.
But it's going to decimate black people. Okay,
Yeah.
all of that is Social Security. You best believe they want to privatize Social Security.
Yeah,
They're trying to
no, that's
privatize
his.
everything they can.
That's Lee Atwater's N-word clip. We've played it on the program a number of times. Excellent points,
Amen.
Morris. Excellent points. And Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains, is brilliant. Thanks for bringing it up. Great to hear from you, Morris, and I hope you have a wonderful, happy New Year. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Mark, watching Free Speech TV in Baltimore. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Mark. Hi. How you doing?
Good.
How come you guys aren't telling your viewers about the Andrew McCabe story in his office?
I don't know.
Creating an insurance platform for the illegal dossier.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Mark.
That's why.
Have you been watching Fox News again?
Know about this.
You've been watching Fox News again, right?
No. It's the facts. I talk to the FBI, the Judiciary Service, the Department all the time.
You talk to the FBI all the time?
Why are you not relaying this information to your viewers?
You talk to the FBI all the time, and they told you that Andrew McCabe is doing what?
I report crimes to the FBI.
I see. Okay.
Why?
So,
okay, another.
My understanding of the situation with Andrew McCabe is that his wife.
McCabe is a criminal.
Is that his wife ran for Congress.
I understand that.
And that the DNC gave her some money, and that was before Hillary was even announced that she was running for president. And Trump is lying about it in his Twitter accounts, saying that it was Hillary people who gave the money to McCabe's wife.
It was Hillary, the FBI, the DNC.
It was the DNC. And the DNC supports all congressional candidates. I mean, there was absolutely nothing weird or abnormal about it. What's weird or abnormal is that Trump is lying about it in his tweets.
Is James Comey not getting a grand jury for the Clintons or subpoenaing the bank records.
He determined that there was no crime there, Mark.
Gave the Clinton Foundation millions of dollars.
Who did?
Why is that not under investigation?
But you are moving along so fast, Mark.
Not under investigation.
Comey didn't.
You guys are going to learn this in 2018.
Yeah, well, I guess so, Mark. Thanks for the. You know, Mark, what would it take? I'm just curious. What would it take to convince you that when James Comey said there was no crime there with regard to Hillary Clinton?
I'm not even a lawyer. And I could convict Hillary Clinton for destroying FBI evidence.
So there's no way that you're going to move. I guess it makes sense that there wouldn't be. If you
Well,
live
wait
in
a
that.
minute. Why don't you verify Hillary Clinton destroying FBI evidence?
It didn't happen.
All them people lying about Hillary Clinton's private server.
Mark, your mind has been poisoned.
No. You're poisoning people.
I'm serious. I'm very concerned about you,
No,
Mark.
I'm
Your mind
concerned
has
about
been poisoned.
You liberals have a mental health problem.
See, this is an example of your mind being poisoned. Who would
it's
go
not
out and tell
poison.
people?
It's you criminals in the D.C. swamp.
So who would?
The D.C. swamp is criminalized by Obama.
You realize that Rupert Murdoch is a billionaire, and that his television network,
care.
Fox News, advances the interests of the billionaire class.
Okay, do you realize?
And it's in the interest of the billionaire class, Mark.
Media are billionaires.
It's in the interest of the billionaire class, Mark, to have you hating on half of the rest of America. I mean, this is really sad. This is really sad. Mark, I don't know what to say. I'll pray for you. Good luck. We'll be back. Welcome back. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Paul.
Someone who talks to the FBI all the time, calls them up to report crimes, might be under surveillance.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, what's on your mind today?
Okay, so you're talking with Curtis Ellis, and this is the whole make it up thing. Okay, Merry Christmas. This is political correctness on the right. This is the right. They're going to force you to say this. I had actually, by the way, there are more people saying Merry Christmas this year than ever before. You know that, don't you? Because you see there, Tom, there is a Merry Christmas counter that ticks up. Matter of fact, it's just ticked up just twice since we've been talking.
Well, there's actually more.
Merry Christmas now 3 times.
There's more people than ever before, too, Paul.
Yeah, well, and guess what? The sun has risen a record number of times in the morning since ever before, too.
Yeah.
So
it rose every day that Trump was president. It's amazing.
Exactly.
I'm surprised he hasn't taken credit for it.
For a record time, every day that he's become president, it's risen a record time.
Yeah.
Okay. So
and the days are getting longer.
What they're saying is that they just make it up and say, "Yep, more people are saying Merry Christmas than ever before," and therefore Trump accomplished this goal, and this is what his base believes.
Yeah, I know.
As a matter of fact, you want to? He says, "What is it?" Curtis says that, "Oh, you have a right to say whatever you want." But while we're banning words that the CDC can use, as a matter of fact, I did offer a happy holidays to a conservative talk show host here in Seattle, someone you probably know. I won't say his name. And he said, while I offer happy holidays, he says, that's Merry Christmas. So he rather than offering back, he corrected me.
Was it one of the talk hosts on Salem who's Jewish?
No, he happens to be on KVI 570.
Okay, never mind.
Okay,
I thought that would be very.
And here was my retort. I said, "Oh, well, Merry Christmas to you too. I would have never guessed that you were Christian." That was my response.
Zing. Okay.
Yeah, well, you got to be ready for these things.
Yeah, I guess so.
And he said, "You wouldn't?" I said, "No, but go ahead." Well, see, that's the thing is that they just keep saying that. And they're just making things up and saying that Trump accomplished this, and his base goes, yeah, see all the things he's done.
Yeah.
These are the things he's done. And I have heard more than one conservative talker say that actually more people are saying Merry Christmas than ever before.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, that's what I said, where is the Merry Christmas counter? Where is this coming from? And the other thing is that Curtis says that saying happy holidays is secularizing the holiday. No, I offer happy holidays to someone that maybe I'm not sure what their faith is. I know that it's an all-encompassing. I don't know if the person is Jewish or what they celebrate, but I'm all-encompassing. And I do say And by the way, Tom, in every Christmas card I write Merry Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And on Christmas Day, I say Merry Christmas. And to anybody who I think might be a practicing Christian and enjoys that, I offer that. But there's nothing wrong with offering an encompassing phrase to include everybody if you're not sure.
Yeah,
and that's not secularizing the holiday.
No, there's a bigger issue here, Paul. I agree with everything you said, but the bigger issue is that there is a whole series, and this is a lot of the stuff that was in the ad that Curtis Ellis is running. There's a whole series of things that are essentially big lies. And apropos of that, let me share with you just a very quick little clip of Franklin Roosevelt speaking of this issue, if I may. Here he is.
According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood. Always a big one. For its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
Now, the part of that clip that was missing was, he started out by saying, Adolf Hitler wrote a very interesting book called Mein Kampf, and in that book he said, and then, the clip that you just heard.
Lee Atwater picked up on that one. Lee Atwater is the one who said that if you say a lie 11 times, it becomes the truth.
Yeah.
That's what they've been practicing. You just lie, and Tom, it's very interesting when you play Franklin Roosevelt. I think that it's not so far-fetched to say that and you know the quote, when fascism comes to America, we'll be wrapped in the flag and carrying the Bible.
Yeah, Sinclair Lewis.
Trump was an invention in 1936 by Sinclair Lewis. At that time, his name was Buzz Windrip, the antagonist in It Can't Happen Here, and Donald Trump was invented a long time ago.
Yeah.
And now he's here, and he's been put here by the John Birchers, the John Birch Society, the alt-right that's been developing for the last 50-some years, and they finally scored. They finally got one in, and, honestly, we let it happen, and we can undo it. We let it happen, but we can undo it, and we have to be more vigilant. And then the propaganda, now they have control of the propaganda machine, and that's what we're hearing.
Right. And right after the top of the hour, I'm going to be talking about 279 for change and the ways that we can actually make that change happen. But you're spot on, Paul. Very, very well said. Always great to hear from you, Paul. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year, Paul. John in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Good. Thank you for taking my call. First of all, I think Mark and Paul both typify what's wrong with this country. You had one guy who's a complete whack job with the FBI and another guy who thinks he always has to be right. So you had a person from the left and right both talk. And the reality is not everyone's entitled to an opinion. And people need to recognize the fact that Donald Trump got elected, it has nothing to do with anything sinister about fascism or anything. Didn't anyone stop to think to say, when voters went to the booth, they looked at what the alternative was, and they exercised their free right to vote.
Well, John, when voters went to the booth, they looked at the alternative to Donald Trump, and they gave her 3 million more votes than they gave to Donald Trump. The reason Donald Trump was in the White House is because the Electoral College was put into place to preserve the institution of slavery. And it's continuing to preserve that by defending the former slave in small states.
So California, which tipped the balance, California, by the way, a state where he got all those votes, a state...
No, Hillary Clinton got votes all over the United States.
Can I finish?
No, you can't. Hillary Clinton got votes all over the United States. Now you can finish, John. Go.
Amazing.
You got 20 seconds. Go.
20 seconds. You know what? There's no sense even talking to you. You're a typical progressive.
It's the top of the hour, John. What am I supposed to do?
You don't want to talk to him.
All right. John, I'm sorry you're unhappy. I wish you a happy New Year anyway. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
And welcome back to our Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, the subtitle Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. This is from the afterword, the very last chapter. It's titled Kali Yuga, which in Hinduism is when the earth goes into a phase of destruction. In the shell-shocked aftermath of the election, President Obama, looking shaken, appeared in the White House Rose Garden to deliver public remarks intended to project a sense of calm. A sense, really, that the basic stability of our country remained intact. Sun is up, Obama said. I know everybody had a long night. I did as well. Had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. End of quote. The next day, when the two men appeared together in the Oval Office, it felt as if the world had slipped through the looking glass. Trump quickly named Bannon his chief White House strategist. Republicans controlled every branch of government. With Trump's ability to defy every political norm, anything seemed possible. Who could argue otherwise after what had just transpired? And yet, within days of his inauguration, Trump's White House was plunged into chaos and scandal from which it has not recovered and may never. Bannon, the imaginative reconceiver of U.S. politics, hung streams of paper listing Trump's promises from the walls of his West Wing office. His strategy, as always, was to launch furious attacks, this time to, quote, shock the system, end quote, and rapidly reorient the federal government in a more nationalist direction. He called this, with what I took to be intentional irony, a shock and awe approach to asserting Trump's power. But Trump's flurry of activity quickly ran into problems. There was his executive order, sprung a week after his inauguration, banning immigrants from 7 majority Muslim countries, which set off nationwide protests and was blocked by the courts. His firing 2 weeks later of National Security Director Michael Flynn for contacts with the Russians. The collapse of his first major legislative initiative, a bill to repeal Obamacare. His firing of FBI Director James Comey. And the swift descent of the West Wing into a viper's nest of backstabbing and leaks. This quick turn toward a crack-up was hardly unforeseeable or even altogether surprising. But it contrasted sharply with the success of a candidate who had dominated his opponents, shaped news coverage, and shown himself to be all but impervious to the forces that overwhelm other politicians. Bannon, whose wild gambits in the campaign had invariably paid off, seemed to run out of magic tricks when Hillary Clinton was no longer a target. The government wasn't as malleable to Trump and Bannon's aggressions as the Republican Party and the cable news channels had been. And they found themselves consistently thwarted and undermined by the courts, by right-wing hardliners in Congress, by their own inexperience and Trump's errant tweets, and by the bureaucracy they were now overseeing. The crises these failures precipitated in the White House cost Bannon much of his influence and soon threatened Trump's presidency. While it's still early in his term, the possibilities that Trump's most ardent supporters once imagined for his presidency already seem to be mostly foreclosed. I think there are 3 main reasons why Trump's administration has so quickly fallen into disorder and confusion. Number 1, Trump thought being president was about asserting dominance. Just after he'd locked up the GOP nominations, Trump said something to me that crystallized his view of politics and explains, to my mind, much of his subsequent difficulties. Quote, I deal with people that are very extraordinarily talented people, he told me. I deal with Steve Wynn. I deal with Carl Icahn. I deal with killers that blow these politicians away. It's not even the same category. This, he meant politics, This is a category that's like 19 levels lower. You understand what I'm saying? Brilliant killers. Trump was equating politics with business and the presidency with the job of being a big shot CEO, a killer. He filled the upper ranks of his administration with people of a similar mindset. Gary Cohn, Wilbur Ross, Steve Bannon, aggressive, domineering men accustomed to getting their way by dint of their position. None had government experience, nor did many others in the West Wing. So none anticipated the problems this approach to governing would cause. Trump's self-conception as the all-powerful apprentice boss blinded him to a fundamental truth of the modern presidency, that the president needs Congress more than the Congress needs the president. Trump's domineering instinct served him poorly, since most members of Congress are secure in their jobs and accountable mainly to their own constituents. And it backfired disastrously when Trump fired Comey after he refused to submit to a pledge of loyalty to his boss. Number two, Trump ran against the Republican Party, Wall Street, and Paul Ryan, but then took up their agenda. Populists often struggle to govern, but Trump scarcely attempted to lead the populist revolution that he promised. In May, he told me he would transform the Republican Party into a workers' party. But while he kept voicing populist shibboleths, the legislative agenda he took up was the standard conservative fare pushed by Paul Ryan. During the GOP primary, Trump has shrewdly sensed its weak point, Ryan's desire to finance tax cuts for the rich by cutting programs like Social Security and Medicaid, harmed the party's white blue-collar base. Trump told me he'd made this point to Ryan directly. He said, quote, "There's no way a Republican is going to beat a Democrat when the Republican is saying we're going to cut your Social Security, and the Democrat is saying we're going to keep it and give you more." The book is Devil's Bargain by Joshua Green, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storm of the Presidency. It's actually
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I wanted to share with you the problem and the solution. Or a solution. A problem and a solution. First of all, the problem. I would argue that this problem is just this whole neoliberal idea that corporations should rule the world, that government of, by, and for we the people should not be of, by, and for we the people, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln, that instead it should be of, by, and for the oligarchs, for the very wealthy. And the very wealthy then, basically own and control the media and make sure, or at least their piece of the media, the Fox News, all the right-wing hate radio stations, they are very specifically, very intentionally programming a perspective, a point of view. And the whole goal of this is to get average working people to vote the interests of the billionaire class rather than the interests of the working class. Real simple, right? Cut taxes, for example, as I pointed out, an hour and a half ago. If you cut taxes on working class people, you actually, over time, will cut their wages. It's just, this is how the world works. So, but if you go back to 2005, Mike Pence put together an email that he sent to Representative Paul Teller on September 13th, 2005. This is right after Hurricane Katrina. And he said, basically, it's titled Pro-Free Market Ideas for Responding to Hurricane Katrina and High Gas. And he says, okay, here's what we need to do. We need to automatically suspend Bacon-Davis prevailing wage laws. In other words, in a disaster area, do away with the requirement that government money is spent at the prevailing wage. In other words, allow people, allow governments, for that matter, to hire people at minimum wage. Allow them to pay crap wages. Paul Ryan added to the list, he said, make the entire area flat tax-free enterprise zone. Waive all regulations. Make it a so-called economic competitiveness zone. 2005 and 2006 capital gains and dividends should be zero, because all those poor people in New Orleans lost their homes, and they're having to live off the dividends from their massive stock investments, and so they shouldn't have to pay taxes on that, right? Mike Pence also said individuals in the affected area should have Section 911, the overseas earned income exclusion, uncapped. In other words, you can earn an infinite amount of money from overseas and not have it taxed. Waive the death tax. In other words, do away with the inheritance tax, because those. It's so bizarre, right? I mean, mostly Hurricane Katrina, the neighborhoods that were most terribly hit were poor and largely black, and so we're going to do away with a tax that's only paid by a few hundred, almost entirely white families every year. Give school choice vouchers for displaced children. Reduce, suspend, or eliminate tariffs on Canadian lumber and Mexican cement. Because, after all, we don't need to buy wood from the United States or cement from the United States. We can streamline the environmental hurdles to building new refineries. Make it easier for small refineries to increase capacity. Allow more offshore drilling. Allow drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Temporarily suspend the gas tax. Permanently reduce the gas tax. Waive or repeal gas formulation requirements under the Clean Air Act. Encourage private market projects to recover usable energy from oil shale. It's called fracking now. This was 2005. I got this, by the way, from Naomi Klein's website, naomiklein.org. And you can find it there, this whole thing on the shock doctrine. So along those lines and what they've been doing, Donald Trump just rolled back rules, basically the fines against nursing homes. If you put grandma in a nursing home and they treat her like crap, you can actually, report the nursing home and they will get hit with a fine if the inspectors determine that, in fact, grandma got beat up or got treated badly. And the money from the nursing home that the nursing home pays in the fine goes into the Medicaid bucket that helps pay for nursing homes. So Trump not only, and by the way, he did this in response to a request from the American Health Care Association, which is the group that represents the companies that own nursing homes. So no more inspections, no more fines, everything's going to be good, we're all happy. This is Trump's Christmas present to America. Here's another one. Trump to slash safety regulations put in place after the nation's worst environmental disaster. This is going to save industry $900 million over a decade. The industry it's going to save specifically, offshore drilling. Because they're just so poor and broke and in trouble. The proposed changes would reverse, this from Think Progress, Mark handwriting today. The proposed changes would reverse safety measures that offshore oil and gas companies consider burdensome. He's quoting from the Wall Street Journal. The proposal has not yet been made public, but it's about to. Over the past 11 months, the Trump administration has canceled or delayed more than 1,500 planned, what they call regulatory actions. I would call them consumer protections. More than any previous president by far, said Donald Trump on December 14th at the White House. They've relaxed obligations to stream real-time data on off. Here's specifically what they're doing. If you're running an offshore oil rig, you have to stream data from that offshore oil rig back to land in continuous real time. In other words, you got to have like a camera and some sensors that are telling you the state of that oil well at all times. You have to stream that back. And there's a requirement that the people who are inspecting your most critical equipment, like the blowout preventer that failed in the Deepwater Horizon thing, the people who are inspecting that most critical equipment can't just be some guy that ExxonMobil hired last week after he left his job as a Pizza Hut delivery driver. They actually have to be people who have a certification that they actually understand and know how that piece of equipment works. So here, this is from the Think Progress piece. The proposal would relax obligations to stream real-time data on offshore oil production operations to onshore facilities where regulators can review them. The changes would also eliminate a requirement that BSEE must certify third-party inspectors of critical equipment, such as the blowout preventer that failed in the Deepwater Horizon spill. So this is the kind of stuff, that's going on. How do we deal with this? what do we do about this? Oh, and actually, I'll give you the answer to that, by the way, in 6 minutes after the break that's coming up in about a minute and a half here. Noam Chomsky lays out in a new book, it's called Requiem for the American Dream, the 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power. And basically, it's how the billionaires, the Rupert Murdochs of the world, the Fox Newses of the world, the multimillionaires, the Sean Hannitys and Rush Limbaughs of the world, how they are working to basically destroy the working class of America and promote the interests of the millionaires and billionaires of which they are part. And Chomsky, in his new book, Requiem for the American Dream, says there's 10 things that they're working on doing. Very simple. Each chapter lays out chapter and verse of how they're doing it, who's doing it, how they're doing it. Number one, reduce democracy. Make it harder to vote, make it harder to participate, just reduce democracy. Number two, shape ideology. You do this with think tanks, with selective news stories, things like that. Number three, redesign the economy. Move it so that the economy works for the wealthy rather than the economy works for working people. Working people from 1930 to 1950 had the highest, to 1980, from the 1940s until the 1980s, working people had the highest growth rate. The bottom 2 quintiles, the bottom 40% of America, saw their wages raise faster than the top 3 quintiles, than the top 60%. That all flipped upside down under Reagan. Shift the burden onto the poor and middle classes, attack the solidarity of the people, let special interests run the regulators, engineer election results, use fear and the power of the state to keep the rabble in line, manufacture consent, and marginalize the population. It's serious, serious stuff. So what can we do about this? Well, there's actually a really great idea out there. I'll share it with you after this break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of solutions and then your calls right after this. And welcome back. Robert in South Gray, South Carolina, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Well, what's on my mind is Medicare. My wife and I are both depending heavily on it now, and with the tax break that Trump has engineered, I was wondering what the future of it is, or what you might think the future is.
Well, what has been reported in the financial media, and we'll have to wait until after the first of the year to see if this actually happens, is that under the rules of sequestration, when you have a piece of legislation that does what this tax cut does, which is basically, borrow a massive amount of money and give it to mostly wealthy people, although some of it is being given to working people as well. When you do that, you have to cut Medicare. So they're talking a 4% cut in Medicare is coming. And the way that would be prevented is if Congress passes a law, and they could do it for 1 year, or they could do it for 10 years or whatever. And it'll be real interesting if they do this to see if they just do it 1 year at a time. They could pass a law saying that we can ignore our own previous law on sequestration. But the future and fate of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are all very, very much at risk, Robert, right now, because you have Republicans controlling both branches of Congress, controlling the White House, and controlling the Supreme Court. And and Republicans have made it their #1 mission since Social Security was passed in the 1930s, since Medicare was passed in the 1960s, and Medicaid, to destroy these programs that they consider socialist. They think that they're sapping the strength of America, the vitality of America, that we are best when we are poor, right? Poverty is a great motivator, it's and all that kind of thing. So that's what I know about it, Robert. And so,
okay.
Keep an eye out. Keep paying attention to this. We'll see where it goes. Thanks a lot for the call. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thank you very much. I wanted to try and offer some information about modern monetary theory. Last week there was a great conversation you had with a fella from the Boston suburb of Brookline, and you guys were using conventional pre-1971 vocabulary, and I wanted to offer hopefully a resource that I can cite here real quick. It's an episode of Pirate TV, which I get to watch on Free Speech TV. Everybody, help them out. You can fundraise for yourself and with others, and as Tom says, share where it is on the dial. Pirate TV is out of Seattle, and there's a fella there, last name Mandel. And I'm sorry, I don't have the entire, well, maybe I do. This particular episode of...
Rich, we have 17 seconds. You want to make your point?
Well, look to Pirate TV for Modern Monetary Theory. The speaker's last name is Mandel,
right.
And I wish I could have offered more. I apologize.
Yeah. Okay, no, it's all good, Rich. It's all good. I'll see what I can do. I'm quite familiar with modern monetary theory, and Stephanie and Bill Black and Stephanie Kellner, I believe, and Bill Black and all those guys, and we've had a number of them on the program many times over the years. But you're right, I tend to use economic language that predates that. Rich, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So there's a bunch of things that Americans really would like. And in fact, I think most of these, I'm going to go through this list, I think most of these are things that even Republicans would like. I mean, these are, some of them are partisan, but most of them are not. Number one, a requirement that every bill, every piece of legislation be, specific to what it's about. No more of this, 300 things jammed into one bill. Number two, becoming a citizen lobbyist. Well, that's good stuff. But let me get to the bills here. Number one, Restrict First Use of Nuclear Weapons Act. This was introduced by Ted Lieu, Ed Markey, and Walter Jones. Makes it illegal for any president to unilaterally authorize a nuclear weapons first strike. Number two, the Paycheck Fairness Act of 2017. This just amends the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 to say you can't discriminate against women. The Women's Health Protection Act of 2017. This protects a woman's right and ability to determine whether and when to bear a child or end a pregnancy by limiting restrictions on the provision of abortion services. The American Opportunity, that might be partisan, I don't know. The American Opportunity Carbon Fee Act. The Clean Energy for America Act, revitalizing clean energy. Ron Wyden introduced this. The previous one was Earl Blumenauer and Sheldon Whitehouse. Saving America's Pollinator Act, that's John Conyers. Government by the People Act, reform the financing of congressional elections. This is John Sarbanes. Conflicts from Political Fundraising Act, Whitehouse and Deutsch. The Disclose Act of 2017, democracy strengthened by casting light on spending in elections, which is what Disclose stands for. That's Sheldon Whitehouse again is promoting that. The Presidential Tax Transparency Act. You got to submit your tax returns if you're going to run for president. The Presidential Conflict of Interest Act. The Automatic Voter Registration Act. Congressional Redistricting. And it goes on. Raise the Wage Act. There's a bunch of these pieces of legislation. So why will none of these pass? Because Republicans control Congress and the White House. So how do you get them passed? Well, the magic number. And a tip of the hat, by the way, to my friend Richard Green, who was here just before I guess it was 2 days before Christmas. We had breakfast together at Denny's, of all things. But anyhow, Richard, former Air America host, an old friend, he dropped by, and he said, "My magic number now is 279." And I'm like, 279? And he's like, "Yeah, we need 218 Democrats in the House of Representatives. You need 60 Democrats in the Senate. So that's 218 plus 60, which is 278. And you need one Democrat in the White House, which is 279. 279 human beings, 279 people, men and women. If we can put them in those positions, 218 Democrats in the House, 60 Democrats in the Senate, one in the White House, all this stuff can be done. So then the question becomes, how do you get to 279? And
the answer is fairly straightforward. If you look at opinion polls, what you find is that the vast majority of Americans, when ideas are presented to them as not being Republican or Democratic, but simply as ideas, as, you know, here's a topic, tend to like them. For example, 79% of Americans think government should be allowed to negotiate drug prices. Republicans don't. They won't let Medicare negotiate drug prices. It's a way of damaging Medicare. 78% of Americans think that students should get the same interest rate as big banks. In other words, less than 1%. 77% of Americans, independent party, 77% of Americans think we should have universal pre-K. 75% of Americans think that we should have fair trade that protects workers, the environment, and jobs. 74% of Americans think we should end all tax loopholes that corporations use to ship jobs overseas. 72% of Americans think that everybody should be able to buy into Medicare. 71% of Americans think we should spend $400 billion this year on infrastructure. 71% of Americans think that all college should be free. 71%. I mean, we did this. We found that this actually worked with the GI Bill after World War II. It worked really well in California until Ronnie Reagan came along and became governor. The list goes on. 70% of Americans want to close offshore corporate tax loopholes. 67% of Americans want to retrain coal miners and oil workers for clean energy jobs. 66% of Americans think we should eliminate the Electoral College, which is the only reason that either George W. Bush or Donald Trump became president. Both of them lost the popular vote. Al Gore got 500,000 more votes. Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes. And yet we ended up with Bush and Trump. Net neutrality. Now, this survey was taken in 2016. This was a year and a half ago. There's a national poll of likely voters, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, conducted by GBA Strategies on behalf of the Progressive Change Institute. 61% at that time of Americans wanted net neutrality. So it's not even, you know, just some sort of partisan thing. It really is about doing the work of America. But because the Republican Party is owned by a group of billionaires and the corporations who made them rich, they don't want these things, right? Because these things don't enrich billionaires, or they slow down the rate at which billionaires are enriched. Instead, you know, so instead we get policies that make billionaires richer and more immune and concentrate wealth in a small number of very, very wealthy families over a long period of time. So how do we solve that problem? 279. And how do we get to 279? Make sure that everybody you know is registered to vote. Check with your state, particularly if you live in a state that has a Republican governor or Secretary of State. Check in your state at least every 6 months and make sure that you are still registered to vote, because the Republicans are purging millions, literally. I was going to say hundreds of thousands. It was several 100,000 in Wisconsin, a couple 100,000 in Michigan, a couple 100,000 in Ohio, a couple 100,000 in Pennsylvania, so that Trump could win each one of those states after they purged hundreds of thousands of largely black Democratic voters and Hispanic voters. I mean, this is Chris Kobach's whole thing. So what we need to do is get people engaged. And I see that happening. I see it happening in a big way with the millennial generation. The website, by the way, for this is 279-4CHANGE, FORCHANGE.us. 279-4CHANGE.us. And thank you, Richard Green.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Medea Benjamin's new book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. And this is from the introduction. Through the women-led peace organization Code Pink, which I co-founded with Jody Evans after the 9/11 attacks, I have spent much of the last decade standing up against U.S. military intervention in the Middle East and supporting local democracy activists. I traveled many times to the region, listening to human rights activists, marching with them in the streets, dodging tear gas and bullets, and getting beaten up and deported by government thugs. I have seen firsthand the deadly effects of U.S. foreign policies. The 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq destroyed the lives of millions, including many of my dear friends, and unleashed the sectarian hatred that later gave birth to the Islamic State. I recall a conversation with my Iraqi colleague Yanar Mohammed, daughter of a Shiite father and a Sunni mother, and founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. When I asked her what was the most notable legacy of the U.S. invasion of her country, she gave the chilling response: we, Sunnis and Shia, learned to hate each other. In another part of the Middle East, U.S. military support for Israel has wreaked havoc on the lives of Palestinians and aroused the ire of people throughout the region. Continuous U.S. military interventions, from drone warfare in Yemen to overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to funneling an endless stream of weapons into the region, have unleashed new levels of violence. But the United States is not the only nation whose massive footprint has been trampling on the lives of people in the Middle East. The other nation is Saudi Arabia, an oppressive monarchy that denies human rights to its own people and exports extremism around the world. It also happens to be the closest U.S. ally in the Arab world. During the 1980s and 1990s, I met intolerant and violent young men in Pakistan and Afghanistan who were trained to hate Westerners in Saudi schools. In 2001, I saw my own nation convulsed by an attack on September 11th that was perpetrated mostly by Saudis. Not hard to connect the dots behind the spread of the Saudi intolerant ideology of Wahhabism, the creation of al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and the attacks in New York, Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino. You can also connect the dots between Saudi Arabia and the failure of some of the historic uprisings associated with the Arab Spring, since the Saudi monarchy did not want calls for democracy to threaten its own grip on power. I was in Bahrain after Saudi tanks crushed the inspiring grassroots encampment in Pearl Square, where tens of thousands had gathered day after day to demand democracy. I will never forget the excitement of being in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, then watching aghast as a military coup backed by the Saudis put some 40,000 activists behind bars. In Yemen, the Saudis took a direct military role in that nation's internal conflict with a ruthless bombing campaign. When I travel overseas, people often ask me why Saudi Arabia, a country that is so repressive internally and overseas, is such a close ally to the United States. Iranian friends want to know why the U.S. government is so outspoken about human rights violations in Iran, but silent about the worst abuses in the Saudi kingdom. Yemenis want to ask why my government supplies weapons to the very nation, Saudi Arabia, that bombed their schools and hospitals. Saudi women ask why the United States, which professes great democratic values, props up a regime that treats women as second-class citizens. The easy answer is oil, weapon sales, and other business interests. Oil has formed the basis for U.S.-Saudi ties. The kingdom has become the largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, and hundreds of billions of Saudi petrodollars help shore up the U.S. economy. But there's another reason, perhaps more critical than any of the others. The American people have not demanded an end to this dysfunctional, toxic relationship. Why? In part, because the American people know so little about it. Even Americans who consider them parts of a peace movement know virtually nothing about the kingdom. The Saudi press is muzzled, foreign journalists are strictly monitored, and only tourists visiting for religious purposes are allowed into the country. Add to that a Saudi lobby that lines the pockets of U.S. think tanks, such as the Middle East Institute, Ivy League universities, such as Harvard and Yale, and influential institutions from the Clinton Foundation to the Carter Center. This checkbook diplomacy helps put a happy face on the abusive monarchy and silences its critics. So we have a lot to uncover. This book is meant to be a primer, giving readers a basic understanding of how the kingdom holds on to power internally and tries to influence the outside world. It looks at the founding of the Saudi state, the treatment of dissidents, religious minorities, women, and migrant workers, the spread of Wahhabism, the kingdom's relationship with the West, and its role in the region, and what the future might hold. As we delve into the inner workings of this dystopian regime, don't mistake criticism of Saudi Arabia for Islamophobia. This book is not a critique of Islam, but a critique of three intertwining factors that have shaped the Saudi nation: the extremist interpretation of Sunni Islam known as Wahhabism, the appropriation of the Saudi state by one family, and Western support for this dynasty. Criticizing Saudi Arabia should not be equated with support for Saudi's nemesis, Iran. The Iranian government is guilty of some of the same abuses as the Saudis. Book Kingdom of the Unjust.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And a tip of the hat to Sue Nethercutt, who is always on top of everything. God bless Sue. She does our newsletter. She runs our chat rooms, or our chat room, which is free and no advertising or anything. I mean, you know, it's over on our website at thomhartmann.com. Well, for that matter, our newsletter is free too, although there are ads in the newsletter. But Sue points out that the email that I was reading about how to basically shock doctrine New Orleans, how to take advantage of that disaster, was not from Mike Pence, it was to Mike Pence. Thank you, Sue, for that. I appreciate that very much. I was going to talk about the yield curve, but I think, you know, instead we'll leave that for another day and pick up your phone calls. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind today?
Felicidades is how we say.
Feliz Navidad, yeah.
By the way. Congratulations for your patience. One of those calls, the guy who was talking directly to the FBI all the time. Well, I don't know how you do it, but I'm going to hurry here. One thing that no one has mentioned yet about that nefarious little girl and the ad about thank you for allowing us to say Merry Christmas again. We must not forget that Trump is speaking to a large percentage of his base that believed Obama was a Muslim. We mustn't forget.
Right.
And he's really talking to them, I think, through all of that.
Well, and also, Nicholas, if you go back and read John Dean's book, Conservatives Without a Conscience, the premise of his book is that about 20% of the population of pretty much any country is just part of humanity. About 20% of us are authoritarians. That is, we
Right.
feel most comfortable in a world of hierarchy and patriarchy. And most authoritarians are authoritarian followers. There's very few authoritarian leaders. And so when you say allowing us to say Merry Christmas, you're speaking authoritarian language. So it would make perfect sense to Trump followers. And it makes people like me go, what the heck?
I know, I do too. You remember Tennessee Williams' Cat in the Hot Tin Roof, Big Daddy.
Right.
Boy, that's been said so many ways.
That's dating us both, Nicholas.
I don't have much time.
Yeah. So what's up?
Two things that are sort of linked, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about the necessity to rethink money, the value of money, particularly after-tax money, and some other. I think I have two things that I can link together very quickly, I hope. We mustn't forget there are some people reconsidering the value of money and the nature of money. It's just not the right people, not the people we want. They are offering part-time jobs with no benefits, of course. They offer people 39-hour work weeks instead of the 40 to get away with the same lack of benefits, and on it goes.
Right.
And it ties into this, if you'll let me. I can't remember the article. I wish I could. You've read it, I'm sure, no doubt, or you know the statistics anyway, on the growth of the oligarchy, the demographic growth of the oligarchy in America. And it is hurrying along at an ever-quickening pace. The point being, one of the reasons that the tax bill rushed through the non-inheritance tax is to further the growth of that oligarchy, to speed it up, to put more hands in fewer people as we rush along through this attempt to reclaim our country. And a personal question: have you named your dog yet?
Yeah, we've named her Chewy, as in Chewbacca.
I was going to suggest Free for Free Speech TV.
Yeah, well, that's nice too, but she chews on everything, so we're calling her Chewy.
That's so cute.
And she seems to like it.
I guess my overall point, there's nothing very brilliant I have to add today, but I think we are really, as you know, and many of us do know, of course, we are really up against it now. And between the part-time jobs, the nefarious nature of firing people after, 30 years of work so that they don't have to pay pensions, on and on it goes. This global oligarchy is rising very quickly, and the demographics are going to undo us as we fight so valiantly against it. And I'll just hang up and let you talk.
I've seen it real time. A member of my family, who was visiting over Christmas, She had a new job. She actually moved around the country for that new job. And just a couple of days before 6 months in, she lost the job. And she doesn't know for sure exactly why. I personally am of the opinion that that's probably the point at which benefits started kicking in. I mean, very often you have 90-day or 6 month probationary periods.
I'm sorry to hear that happened to anyone we know, much less a relative. But we must pay very close attention to what's going on. There are people rethinking all of these things, and it's just not in quite the direction we need and wish.
Yeah, they've been working on this for some time. It's a major project. It goes back to '71 and the Powell memo. It's spot on. Nicholas, thank you for the call and for your holiday wishes. Great to hear from you. Ed in Washington, D.C. Hey, Ed, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, you mind if I change the subject back to taxes?
Sure.
Okay, Republicans say that corporations will use extra after-tax cash for hiring, and you do a good job of knocking that down from a economic perspective and historic perspective, but I want to point out why it's also false from an accounting standpoint. And to be short, the reason is a company's payroll is a business expense that's normally a deduction from the corporate income tax they pay.
Right.
But if they used after-tax cash for payroll instead, they'd not only be forsaking the deduction, they'd also be paying the full income tax on their payroll unnecessarily.
Right. No corporation's going to do that.
Well, exactly. And the other thing I'd say about it is that corporate income tax only applies to corporate profits, and a corporate profit is, by definition, money that they've already decided to not spend on hiring.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a really, really good point, Ed. And the fact that wages are 100% deductible to a corporation certainly demonstrates that there's no relationship or very little relationship between leftover profits and higher wages. You know, it's excellent point. Ed, thank you for making that. Thank you. Al in Austin, Texas. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
One of the things you forgot to mention in terms of what's happened since Reagan and how wages have stagnated and the tax cuts for the wealthy is the economy of debt that is generated now since the 80s with psychotic mortgage instruments, the short-term paper, credit card bills of 12 and 13% predatory interest, that essentially that we've gotten rid of essentially a consumer economy based on actual wealth to a consumer economy where even discretionary spending results in debt.
Right. Well, this is the progression. You know, when Reagan took a meat axe to the middle class, the first thing that people did was they started, you know, suddenly they found as their wages were collapsing that they were living beyond their means, and so the first thing that happened was second and third wage earners went into the workplace. Women entered the workplace in large numbers, and then even young people who were still living at home with mom and dad entered the workplace and brought money home to that household. So that happened first. Then people started putting the money on their mortgages, you know, with home equity loans and things like that until they were almost underwater in their mortgages. Then they started putting money on their credit cards. So we now have over $1 trillion in credit card debt in the United States that is not paid off at the end of every month. You've got,
and that's one of the things. That's one of the things that will lead, I think, to the next crisis, which is what happened in 2008, where, with all this predatory lending creating these enormous amounts of personal debt, and all of this money that's being hoarded by the wealthy will essentially, since it's really an abstraction, that it's not real actual wealth they're holding, but it's appraise value in terms of all of their corporate holdings, that once the consumers go into Chapter 11 again, everything that they hold that was worth, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars is going to essentially become worthless paper.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm waiting for. It's kind of like a cat watching the canary. I mean, I think that's what it's going to be. Right now, we still have Dodd-Frank and a lot of regulatory things, which once those are dismantled and predatory lending can exert a really strong grip, all it takes is a war, a steep hike in oil prices, which is what I think really accelerated 2008 in terms of it. It was already bad. But it really takes just that gear in the debt mechanism, which I think is what's going to trigger the next collapse.
The other thing, Al, could be a widespread, wholesale rejection by the millennial generation of student debt. If a critical point is hit, if there was some sort of national, social media-driven hashtag sort of movement where it suddenly became fashionable and there was a large enough critical mass of people to do it that the government and banks had to react. Because there's over $1 trillion worth of student debt too, which literally did not exist 30 years ago. I mean, I went to college in the 1960s. I didn't know anybody. I knew one person with student debt, and he was in the medical school at MSU. He was in the DO school, and he only had to go into debt for his DO to become a doctor. He was able to do his undergraduate stuff, and by working part-time jobs like all the rest of us did. And so that, I mean, the Reaganomics has transformed our economy in a whole bunch of ways that are just little time bombs, or landmines, or whatever metaphor you want to use, sitting around that, any one of which could flip us again. And I fully expect that in fact, I expected it to happen in 2016, which is why I wrote the book Crash in 2016. But we are in an economy that is very, very fragile. Not just in the U.S. This is true all over the world. And it's not government debt. It's corporate and individual debt, and the money that is sloshing around in corporate coffers. I mean, it's truly remarkable. Al, thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. The yield curve as a leading indicator. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, heads up, the yield curve seems to be flattening. That's not a good thing. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Tom, watching Free Speech TV in Joshua Tree, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. A pleasure to talk to you again. I'm curious about your thoughts regarding the Forbes 300 list and how the super wealthy use that as a potential form of personal currency and in their interactive evaluations of themselves and their colleagues, and what percentage of those 300, where do they stand in terms of their political leanings with regards to where we're headed in climate change and everything else you've been talking about?
Yeah. With regard to climate change, I don't know, and I don't know the politics of the 300 wealthiest people in America. I think that the story of Wilbur Ross, though, the Commerce Secretary in the Trump administration, who, according to Forbes, for years and years is worth, what, $4 billion, as I recall? And it turns out when he had to do the disclosure forms to be in the cabinet, the government disclosure forms, he actually honestly filled them out, apparently, and he's only worth $800 million. And so they've dropped him off their billionaire list. But that's pretty much all I know about it, Tom. I would assume that most of those very, very wealthy people are supportive of politics that support their wealth. I mean, wouldn't you? I mean, there's a few Tom Steyers out there, but they're few and far between.
Yeah, well, I think that, just from a rough, kind of a guesstimation, a lot of those people, they want to know where they are when the list comes out and, have they moved up, have they moved down?
Right.
And you look at, why a person would need so much money, way beyond, what anybody could ever possibly spend, even if they spend it $1,000 a minute, how they would assess themselves. And it just seems like that's a marker that, sort of gives them a feeling of how they've achieved, whatever measure in life to be number one on the list, or
right.
In the case of Donald Trump, is he moving up or is he moving down? If he sees himself moving up the list next year, does that mean his policies seem to be, positive in his assessment? And since he's doing better than so-and-so, he's going to continue with policies that seem to work for him in that regard. it just bothers me that there'd be an assessment such as that, and maybe Forbes should do a list of the people who are doing the worst on account of political, climates and what's going on around the world. But
it would be interesting to see a profile of the 300 poorest people in America.
Yeah, just to find out, how it goes. But thank you, Tom.
But thank you, Tom. Thanks for the call. The other thing I would add, by the way, to what you're talking about, Tom, is that, and I've been saying this for a long, long time, that when people have the mental illness, this is in the DSM of the APA, it's certifiable mental illness of hoarding syndrome. It's a form of obsessive compulsive disorder. It's largely out of their conscious control. When people have this and they're poor or middle class, they tend to have a house filled with tin cans and newspapers and books and empty jars and rubber bands. When people have this form of mental illness and Daddy gave them a couple $100 million when he died, they tend to become billionaires. They hoard money. And I am convinced from the few very, very wealthy people that I've met in my life, and from what I've seen and know of a number of others, that a not inconsequential percentage of that Forbes 300 list probably has hoarding syndrome, and they are spending all of their time and effort on hoarding money. And they're probably doing it out of the same psychopathology, a fear of loss, a fear of lack. But Tom, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Dave in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Thanks, Tom. I'm going quickly. There's a new documentary out by Michael Perlman. It's called The Politics of Hate. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
And
where can I find it, Dave?
About, what's that?
Where can I find it?
On the internet. Look up Politics of Hate. There's a 4-minute trailer and $2.99 to rent it.
Okay, got it.
And it's about the neo-Nazis, the rise of the alt in America and Europe, and they blend Trump in the middle.
Okay.
The need to shut down the government. And we can use it as a leverage point for DACA that will end up becoming 1 year. In 1 year of signing the document, they will become citizens. We can do something like that. And then the CHIP program. And then we also can relate to either talk about putting infrastructure, the Army or the military, and then, but I have a pivot point for Trump to walk out of the office, and it's this time, and it's up to the Democratic Party who's in charge, and it's not going to be legal. It's going to be on his moral compass, and saying things like Obama is a Muslim, and he won't show his taxes and things like that. And the issue is this: the Democratic Party, the left, can ask Trump to show his taxes for the last 5 years, or the government doesn't open. And if it doesn't open because he won't show his taxes, then the government shouldn't be open in the first place.
Yeah. Interesting. Dave, we'll have to see how this movie plays out, but my guess is that Mueller is going to find substantial financial improprieties associated with the Trump companies and with the Trump campaign.
But by shutting him down and not allowing him to, what will happen by not allowing him any movement, he doesn't create any more problems in the government. How much problems can he create?
Right, but that may or may not be the case. But where I was going with that thought was to suggest that I'm not sure that impeachment is going to be as easy with Trump as it was with either Clinton or Nixon. And Nixon had a sense of morality and an understanding of government. Trump has neither. Bill Clinton had a sense of morality and understanding of government. Bill Clinton was, genuinely contrite when he got busted. Donald Trump is not. He's the exact opposite of that. He's kicking back. So,
do you think Trump will show his taxes, though?
No, I don't think he will. And
we can shut down the government, and then the whole.
But see, the Democrats don't have the power to shut down government, Dave. The Democrats
he won't show his taxes.
Yeah, I got it. But the Democrats don't have the power to shut down government. They don't control the House, and they don't control the Senate.
In January 29th, the budget's coming, and we can either open the government or shut the government down.
But Democrats have no say in that, Dave. Republicans control.
We have the control over the budget and whether the government opens or closes.
No, we don't. I'm sorry, Dave. We don't. Just trust me on this. And I got to stop. You know, yes, no. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Well, a belated 2 days late Merry Christmas to you and your lovely wife and your staff and family and the whole Thom Hartmann Nation.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you too, George, and thank you for your sentiments.
Prosperous and democratically successful new year.
Yeah.
I'd like to address this so-called war on Christmas and this odd phrase, conservative Christian, which is an oxymoron, a complete contradiction in terms, because all you have to do is read Jesus' own words. It's clear he was a liberal.
Yeah.
He said that faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love. Love God with your whole mind, whole heart, whole soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. And, of course, the lessons he taught us in the Sermon at the Mount, all of which find a very comfortable fit with progressives, liberals, and Democrats, and no fit at all with conservatives, reactionaries, right-wingers, or Republicans, and certainly not Donald Trump. And I'd also like to make the point that we all know that in the early church, the early followers of Jesus celebrated his birth as a minor holiday in the spring because that's when they believed he was born.
Right.
And our amalgam of traditions that come bound up in what we now see as Christmas comes from pagan Northern Europe, from the Roman Saturnalia, and from Constantine, the Emperor of Rome, about 400, I guess, who decided that he was going to tack Jesus' birthday onto the Saturnalia.
Yeah, the second council of Constantinople was 333, as I recall, 366. It was something, but yeah, it was just short of 400.
In any event, the early followers of Jesus didn't even know the word Christ. That's a Greek root and came much later.
That's right.
And so they would have celebrated the birth of Jesus, or Yeshua, as it was probably said in Aramaic, because he didn't even speak Hebrew.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. George, your phone is breaking up, so I'm going to let you go. But thank you. You put a lot into that call, and you're spot on right. And we just have 1 minute left, so let me just get one more caller in here. Tom in Louisville, Tennessee. Tom, the last minute is yours. What's up?
Tom, first off, I want to say that I live in East Tennessee, so I have to try to follow Republican logic often.
Okay.
But with the corporate tax rate and the Republican belief that corporations are individuals, why do they have a lower tax rate than other individuals?
Oh, because they're special.
Okay.
Just like the bankers, they kept carried interest in there. You know, if you're a bankster, if you're Mitt Romney, your top tax rate is going to be 20%.
Right. And
because he's special.
I've asked my Republican friends in East Tennessee, and their face just goes blank when I ask them that question.
Yeah.
Because they have no answer.
Yeah. Well, you know, and not only that,
when you have a corporate. Go on, sir.
Well, there's just a million contradictions in corporate personhood. I mean, you know, when do you have a funeral for a corporation? You know, et cetera. But Tom, I love the old bumper sticker. I will believe that a corporation is a person when Texas executes one. So, Tom, thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Thank you all for being with us today. And, you know, it's a little late, but Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. It's a little early. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll be talking about this and all the news of the day. And I will get into the yield curve tomorrow, I promise. And all the other news that's sitting around. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag. You're in. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.